ABC 7 Eyewitness News at 7 starts streaming now.
Welcome, everybody, to our special election night edition of Eyewitness News at 7 o'clock.
We're ready to do this again, right? The polls just closed 10 seconds ago. And today, the two candidates hoping to become Chicago's next mayor were both out in the city meeting with voters in the final hours of their campaigns.
So tonight, we have team coverage and a team of reporters out covering the mayoral race, along with the alderperson runoffs and suburban elections.
But before we get into all of our election coverage, we need to update you on the storms that have been moving through our area. The wind's so strong, look at that. They knocked down this tree in the Lincoln Park neighborhood.
And out in the suburbs, a power pole came down in LaGrange Park. And we have seen video and photos of hail that pelted several communities.
Meteorologist Cheryl Scott is with us. She joins us now to track the storms. And Cheryl, there might be more rounds coming.
Yes, this is a look back earlier this morning and into the afternoon. We did have several severe storms roll through the area, producing the large hail and the high winds. Right now, we're in a bit of a lull, but you can see the trail here of our hail reports coming in from the showers and storms that moved on through. And on top of that, even some wind damage reports coming in for parts of Cook County from about Bellwood stretching all the way to the lakefront. Some straight line winds here potentially, with those downbursts of gusty winds upwards of 50 miles per hour not out of the question. You can see the temperature difference across the region. To the north, in the 40s. To the south, some of you getting close to 80 degrees today, in the mid 70s. This warmth and moisture crashing into the cooler air, a warm front lifting overhead. Still some ingredients to work with here as we go into the evening. Still the threat of an isolated severe storm, but that's part one. Part two arrives tomorrow morning with a cold front, and that's going to allow for more showers and storms to develop across the area. Notice the tornado watch just off to the west southwest of us, and monitoring this cluster of storms just downstate out to the southwest here in parts of central Illinois. This is going to continue to lift its way up to the north and east, slowing a bit, moving to the northeast at about 20-30 miles per hour. You can see it's tornado warned right now, so we still do have the dynamics in the atmosphere for some severe storms, likely getting closer to our southern counties around LaSalle, Livingston at about 8:15 to about 8:30. So we have to monitor these, and as we go into the evening, any storms that make it into our region have the potential to become severe, and all severe modes at play, which means hail, high winds, and an isolated tornado threat. And those threats carry over into the morning hours tomorrow, which could impact the morning commute. We'll have that all covered. Back to you.
Very busy night in the Weather Center for us tonight. Now, as we continue to keep an eye on the weather, we want to get back to our election night coverage. The biggest race we are watching tonight is the Chicago mayoral runoff. Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallas competing to become the city's next leader.
We have reporters with both candidates tonight. We start with ABC 7 political reporter Craig Wall, who's with the Paul Vallas campaign in the Loop. Good evening, Craig.
Hi guys, we're at the Hyatt. Paul Vallas is in a room upstairs where he's going to be watching the returns come in with members of his campaign staff as well as his family. This has been a very busy campaign for him since it all started back in June of last year. The big question tonight, will the vote break one way or another enough for us to determine the outcome tonight? Now, Paul Vallas doing his part to help with his election bid, casting his ballot this morning at a polling place near his home. The former city budget director and CEO of Chicago Public Schools, who handily won the February 28th election, now in a nail-biter in the runoff election. Vallas's only other stop today at Manny's Deli, a time-honored Election Day tradition in Chicago. Vallas says he believes he's finished strong in a campaign where he's endured a lot of attacks.
It's been a great campaign. It's certainly been exhilarating, and I've, I like to think that I've focused on the issues that are important to Chicagoans.
Vallas made public safety his top priority tonight. He tried to, in his campaign, I should say, he tried to attack Brandon Johnson on several levels for Johnson's support of the defund the police narrative, as well as Johnson's $800 million budget plan. Vallas hoping to hear results tonight that are going to put him to victory. A number of his supporters are here, and they're starting to trickle in. Now, back to you in the studio.
All right, Craig, thanks so much for that update tonight. Stick around. We'll be talking with you a little bit later on. And ABC 7's Sarah Schulte is with the Brandon Johnson campaign in the South Loop tonight. Sarah, how's it going where you are?
Well, Cheryl, the Brandon Johnson party is just getting underway. When I caught up with him earlier today on a day that was extremely busy for him, he did say that he's very confident that he can pull this off tonight. Let's just see how confident he is. Joining me right now is Brandon Johnson's senior advisor, Jason Lee. I mean, we talked about confidence, but what is the reality of this right now? What are you seeing?
Well, we feel very good. Today was a great day for the campaign. We knocked on over 45,000 doors by 5 o'clock. We sent over 100,000 text messages, made tens of thousands of calls. We've been communicating with voters all over the city about the importance of this election, and the response has been great. And we see youth turnout is up. Our younger voters are turning out at higher numbers, which is something that a little few people expected, and so that bodes well for us. So we feel like our efforts are paying off, getting out our base, and we look forward to the results coming in.
The youth, yeah, but really not a whole lot up. It's still, I know, at the end of it's over 3%.
Showed a race that was neck and neck, and so even small increases that are outside models could have a huge impact on this race.
All right, Sarah, having an issue with your mic. We've got plenty of time this evening to get that corrected. Well, we want to bring in our election night analysts, and joining us, ABC 7 political analyst Laura Washington and David Greising, of the Better Government Association. Nice to have both of you back here with us.
Nice to be back.
Feel like it was just February.
Right, just 5 weeks ago we sat here all night, and it was really an interesting night.
It's been a really short turnaround on this election, too.
It has, and that turned into a short. We got a concession from Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and things started happening quickly. Really? Will that happen tonight?
Right.
We just don't know. Cheryl and I were discussing the numbers in today from the Chicago Board of Elections, and the updated number we had 30%.
30%
Oh, wow.
as of about 6
That was
tonight.
yeah. That was about before the polls had closed.
That's
So I'll start
30% for today, for today's
Right,
turnout.
for today's turnout.
Yeah, so just right off the bat,
registered voters.
your observations on that. We still have some time to get the new returns. Are starting to get some real returns, but that's a pretty low number.
It's disappointing. It's lower, I believe, than it was on February 28th, and it's just a municipal election. It's a consequential election, probably one of the biggest, most important elections we've had in decades. So it sounds like there wasn't the kind of voter interest that you would expect.
Well, you talk about it being an interesting election. I'm thinking back to Harold Washington, Bernie Epton.
That was the last most interesting one.
That's an interesting one for sure. Yeah.
So, David, what do you think about that low number?
It possibly has ramifications in terms of who gets elected tonight. There's been a lot of discussion about a high turnout might favor Brandon Johnson. And you drew the parallel with Washington Epton. This is a very similar feeling campaign in the fact that Brandon Johnson has, from such a low start to where he is today, has seemed to just been on a trajectory of growth in support, where Vallis kind of hit a level and more or less seemed to flatten out. And so the low number may indicate that the turnout Johnson was hoping for didn't turn out to be quite what had been expected.
His campaign manager just telling Sarah Schulte they knocked on 45,000 doors.
Wow, yeah.
6 months ago, Brandon Johnson only had 2% of the votes.
Yeah.
So, and then he came in second place, on February 28th. Let's talk about the numbers today and the significance. $20 million spent somewhat for this runoff election, or $18 million between the two of them. Paul Vallis spending more money in ads, 2-1 over Brandon Johnson.
Well, that indicates sort of what David was suggesting, that Vallis is kind of plateaued. He came out of the first round way ahead of Johnson. Johnson has made up a tremendous amount of ground, I think, despite the fact that he didn't have the kind of dollars that Vallis had, but because he has the ground game, he has those troops on the ground connected to the unions that are supporting him. And the big test might be tonight as to whether or not they were able to overcome their disadvantages to get their vote out on Election Day.
Yeah, it was fascinating to watch the strategies of these campaigns. The night both of them got up in front of their supporters, Brandon Johnson did not hesitate to go after Paul Vallis immediately and has stuck to that, a Republican disguised as a Democrat. David, does that come into play, do you believe, today when people were voting? Do you think people took that to heart, or is this just a strategy that Johnson doubled down on clearly and thought that might help him win?
Well, the thing is that what he was going up against was Vallis, who had very well defined himself during the primary as the law and order candidate, emphasizing public safety and policing. And the nature of the campaign was such that Vallis had to spread to other issues like economic development, education, et cetera. And so Johnson was able to pick off various parts. The Republican thing, I think, has stuck a little bit, and partly because so much of Vallis's support has come from conservative quarters and conservative money. And so even though he is a lifelong Democrat, the conservatives, the business community, and others have really lined up behind Vallis. And while that benefited him in some respects, it really played into Brandon Johnson's narrative that he's a Republican in Democratic clothing.
And Vallis has pleaded over and over again that he's a Democrat. He's running as a Democrat 3 times before this. He's worked for Democratic administrations, but Vallis has been gone from the scene for quite a long time. So I don't think there was a lot of high-level public consciousness of really who he was. So that also allowed Johnson to be able to paint him as he saw him.
And Paul Vallis had some very prominent Democrats supporting him. You can't call Senator Dick Durbin, a Republican. That's a hard one to pull off. So many more questions for the two of you. I want to break down. So I know Cheryl has a ton more. We're glad you're with us because we got a lot more to discuss, so we appreciate it.
All right, stick around because we've got all night to talk about this, and we're going to talk about what you said, that very important lakefront and Latino vote that could make a difference and could impact the decision tonight. So stick around. We've got a lot more, but tonight we, of course, have full election coverage on our website at abc7chicago.com.
There's another big story we're watching tonight. Perhaps you heard former President Donald Trump appearing in a New York courtroom today for his arraignment.
And the former president set to speak tonight from Florida. Investigative reporter Chuck Gowdy following this story tonight from our newsroom with late details. Chuck.
Cheryl, not much happening today, right? 34 felony counts and allegations of hush money for personal and political manipulation. The response just in from former President Trump: no surprises and no case. That's what Mr. Trump posted a short time ago while he was on his plane en route from Palm Beach to New York City. Of course, he's now back in Florida. The ex-president arriving at Manhattan District Court earlier today for arraignment on the charges, all of them allegations of falsifying business records, a payoff plot to allegedly cover up politically damaging information, a so-called catch-and-kill scheme that would help pave the way to Trump's election in 2016, according to prosecutors. Mr. Trump personally telling the judge he's not guilty. That statement usually made by a defendant's attorney. The I-Team now with former federal prosecutor and ABC7 legal analyst Gil Sofer.
The evidence would consist of all the different components that a criminal case typically consists of. It would include documents. In this case, it would be the business records. It would include testimony, in this case, certainly by Michael Cohen. If they have an audio recording of a conversation, and there is an implication in that statement of facts that they might have an audio recording, they would present that too.
We today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle.
He is angry because the DA has brought a case that is unjustified.
We will see shortly, of course. We'll see shortly whether Mr. Trump's anger carries over into his planned speech at Mar-a-Lago, the residence and private club of Mr. Trump in Florida. And apparently, former President Trump has already been admonished by the New York judge sitting on his case. Tonight, he's been told not to say anything publicly that could be considered an invitation to violence by crowds of protesters. Rob?
Chuck, we're used to having you down at the Chicago Board of Elections, but this is a big one too. So we're glad you're in our newsroom. We can hear the buzz behind you as we continue to gather information on the story you're talking about. So thanks, and we'll see you again. You were mentioning what is going to happen at Mar-a-Lago, and take a look at this. We're waiting for the former president to speak tonight. This is a live look at his Mar-a-Lago resort down in Florida. ABC News is monitoring this. We'll have a special report on Trump's speech, and we plan to at least take some of that from the network as we see these developments happen tonight.
Of course, as we monitor that, we're coming back here at home. We're getting more video tonight showing the aftermath of the storms that moved through earlier in Oak Park. A chimney came toppling down, causing some damage to a home. Our
Liz Nagy live in Oak Park tonight with a closer look at damage across the area. Liz?
Rob, Cheryl, the storm didn't last long, but it was here long enough to do some significant damage, at least in certain parts of the western suburbs, particularly in certain areas here in Oak Park. We're told by some people who live here that the Austin Gardens neighborhood has been hard hit, where they have some very old trees that have come down on homes, just completely ripped out of the ground. And here where we are in the northeast section of Oak Park, you can see there are ComEd crews working to restore some power lines at this intersection where we're standing. The traffic lights are out, so people are having to to move through these neighborhoods with caution. And until just about 10 to 15 minutes ago, there was a very large tree removal crew removing a very old, very large tree that had toppled down on top of some of those power lines and taken them with them. You can see that power line is now dangling across the road. And we've seen things like this periodically driving around Oak Park over the last few hours. But to give you an idea of what that storm looked like when it moved through, let's take a look at some video that some of our crews captured around the western suburbs this afternoon. Listen to that. That is the sound of hail falling in Oak Park, in the LaGrange Park area, in the Villa Park area around 2 o'clock this afternoon. And some of those pieces of hail were significant. There's a shot of somebody holding some of those chunks of hail in their hand. There was high wind associated with that storm that came tearing through the western suburbs, strong enough to completely rip the bricks off a chimney of one of the homes here in Oak Park. Those bricks were left laying in the yard for crews to come and clean up, and trees were brought down all over the area. So there were no injuries that we've heard of this afternoon, but a significant amount of physical damage, at least periodically, around Oak Park, Villa Park, LaGrange Park. We did speak to a woman who was inside a church here in Oak Park along Lake Street this afternoon, and they had some damage. This is what she said it sounded like as that storm came through.
I was sitting in a chair and I actually felt like the wind was trying to pull away one of the outside wall. That's what it sounded like.
It was that intense?
Yes. Didn't hear any sirens, so later on as I reflect, I'm like, probably it was not a tornado, otherwise the siren would have went off, but it was definitely a very strong wind.
Hanging out.
And this is some video of a manufacturing facility on the west side of Chicago in the Hermosa neighborhood, where the roof tore off of that facility also around 2 o'clock this afternoon. I spoke to a man who was inside that facility at the time. He said there were about a dozen workers or so in there, and all of a sudden they said the roof just ripped off. Nobody was injured, but of course pieces of debris from that roof and pieces of piping and stuff that were inside that facility did fall to the ground. Again, fortunately, nobody was hurt, but some significant damage associated with this storm that blew through quickly this afternoon. And of course, as these crews are working to repair some of this damage, to pick up those trees and restore the power, they're now bracing for another round of storms that could come through later tonight and again tomorrow morning. Rob and Cheryl.
All right, Liz, thank you so much taking us inside that damage and destruction. We appreciate your report. And tonight, everybody, we are also following some other major stories on this election day, including the tragic loss for the city of Chicago after a firefighter dies in the line of duty. 49-year-old Jermaine Pelt was battling a fire at 120th and Wallace. When he went down, efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. Pelt had just walked his daughter down the aisle at her wedding. She was on her honeymoon. Fellow firefighters and his father among those remembering him today.
Jermaine, he'd be willing to help anybody. We're gonna miss him. And I know all of the fire department family is gonna miss him.
Just so heartbreaking. The state fire marshal and the ATF are assisting with this fire investigation.
5 students taken into custody today after a lockdown and massive police response at Highland Park High School. Officials say there was a report of a student in possession of a gun. The lockdown went into effect just minutes after students walked out of class, calling for an assault rifle ban. Anxious parents and former students arrived at the school with last summer's Highland Park parade shooting top of mind.
After what happened in July, everyone's on high alert here always, and got here and like my stomach sank.
Just really feel for all these kids who can't come to school on a daily basis and know that they're going to be safe.
The incident temporarily shut down 4 Lake County, Illinois voting sites. Glad everyone's okay there. We are getting some early results, Cheryl, in the mayor's race. We haven't seen these, so let's take a look at it. Right, they're coming in. We'll look at these live with you as well. I think we have some of the returns. Let's take them if we see them. Otherwise, we can continue to move on here. We're going to talk about some of the aldermanic races. Do we have them, Michelle? They're working on it. Okay. Let's keep going on the meantime here to the 29th ward. This is a runoff. You got it. There we go. Okay. So we just passed it. Yeah.
All right.
I couldn't see what it was. There it is. Okay. Go ahead, Cheryl.
This is a live show tonight, so
right. 21%
just
in. Go
bear
ahead.
with us. All right. All right, in Will County, the mayor there in Homer Glen, Christina Netzky, getting 66% of the vote there. These numbers are going pretty fast. This one in Kendall County. All right, let's go back to the mayoral runoff. Not sure if these numbers are.
This is accurate. 21% in, you see there. These numbers just coming in. 53% Paul Vallis, 59,179 votes to Brandon Johnson with 47%, 52,680. So just over 20% in to our newsroom here.
All right, 20 minutes in after the polls closed.
And we knew that some of those early votes were going to come. They were going to have those ready to go. And so you would think that some of this is reflecting those numbers. Can we bring in our guests here again to talk a little bit about this? So here we are, a 6 percentage point lead for Paul Vallis. Laura, that is kind of what the polls were showing, right? A 5 percentage point lead.
Had around a 4% lead. It went from 2% a couple weeks ago to 4%, but there's a margin of error in there of like 3 points or something. So it looks like so far the margin of error is favoring Vallis. But it'll be interesting to see because in the last election, Brandon Johnson got significant amount of the early vote. And so if that trend were to continue, it may be true that Brandon Johnson may pick up later, either through picking up early vote tonight or what comes in the next couple of days if it's too close to call.
We should mention, if you see a lot of the red lights behind us, there is some fire activity going on State Street outside our State Street studios, and ambulance out there as well. We're not sure what's happening, but you can see all of the lights blinking behind us, so don't be alarmed. We'll find out what's going on. In the meantime, let's talk about the endorsements, and do they matter? These heavy-duty endorsements from superstars, from other senators, do they matter at the end for a voter when they go in to make their selection?
Well, I think they do matter. And the fact that Paul Vallis picked up a number of endorsements from some black leaders, Jesse White in particular, within a couple days of the primary, was a real signal to the black community that it was okay to vote for Paul Vallis, and I think that probably helped him and carried momentum as his campaign did a pretty good job of stringing out endorsements. So there was sort of a constant stream of endorsements. On the other hand, Brandon Johnson has the support of Tony Preckwinkle, who also has quite a following, and so I don't know if maybe they kind of canceled each other out, but I think with some. In some cases, it does help.
It does help.
They both showed up at some of the same churches over the course of the campaign, and so they were both hitting a lot of the same marks, I think, in terms of campaign strategy.
You got to give both of them credit. Since we were all last here until today, these two candidates did not stop. They were out campaigning every day, every morning, every night. They worked hard to get to this point. Bernie Sanders came in town. And as we talk about endorsements, Cheryl, like you were mentioning, the young vote did not come out, as we've talked about in the past, Laura. Does he spawn some votes that would help Brandon Johnson, particularly the young vote, in a city where it has been apathetic at best?
Well, the returns that I saw maybe an hour ago from the Board of Elections show that 18 to 24 is about 3% of the vote, which is about what it was last time around. So it looks like they're not responding this time. You know, young people, they get very enthusiastic and they go to rallies, as they did with Bernie Sanders the other night. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to turn out. They also tend to turn out late. They're not going to be as likely to early vote. But don't forget about the progressive vote either. That's a very key piece of the constituency here. And Bernie Sanders has a lot of support among that group. So that might have given progressive voters who were on the fence, and many of them were on the fence about Brandon Johnson, that might have given them a little bit more permission to go with him.
And as today's numbers come in, maybe we start to see that younger vote number come up if they're day of voters, but we'll have to see as we continue tonight.
Right, and there's specific wards that directly and significantly impact the young vote too. When they do the research, there are certain wards where more young people come out to vote. We're talking about the numbers today. 55 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. The son of Dr. King comes to Chicago to endorse Brandon Johnson. Brandon goes to Selma to mark Bloody Sunday. Does that have any impact when people are going to the polls and they think about the significance, the impact, the historical part of that? Everybody has a why when they go to...
Yeah, right.
Well, I think going to Selma, certainly he has right from the beginning tried to wrap himself in that civil rights legacy here in Chicago. And And it also plays truthfully because he is such a progressive. And so I think probably resonates and it no doubt is effective. One of the strongest arguments really to consider him as a serious candidate is that he carries on a legacy of Dr. King through Harold Washington to the present day.
He was really positioning himself as a movement candidate like a Harold Washington. And so that's synonymous with a Martin Luther King, with the civil rights activism that they represented. And the black vote, again, was also really in play. Johnson has to get at least 70% plus of the black vote in order to win tonight, at minimum, not even including where he gets his other votes from. And in order to do that, you really want to be able to appeal to that constituency, and that whole civil rights messaging was designed to do that, especially for older African-American voters.
Some pundits were saying 80%. Apparently we have some new results in, we're being told. Let's hope they stay on the screen for a second, and they do. And look at that, we have jumped all the way up to 56% of the votes in.
That was very quick, and we're about halfway through the 7 o'clock hour. So, and Paul Vallis with 52% of the vote, Brandon Johnson with 48% of the vote. Now let's go to the 4th Ward here in Chicago, where Lamont Robinson is holding at 65%, with 43% of the votes being cast to Prentice Butler with 35%. It
looked like Brandon Johnson has closed that gap in the race for Chicago mayor. Here's the 5th Ward alderperson race. Desmond Yancey has a 53%, so just over 1,500 votes in that ward. And Tina Hone with 47% of the vote there, 1,300. So we'll keep going here.
All right. In the ward, 6th Ward, we've got these two candidates, 26% in for these two candidates. William Hall with 56% of the vote at more than 1,400 cast, and Richard Wooten with 44% with more than 1,100 votes cast for him.
10th Ward, Peter Chico has 64%, just over 2,400 votes for him. And Ana Guayardo with 36%. That's a sizable lead for Peter Chico with just about half of the votes in.
And this is the ward that everybody is watching. Of course, Mayor Lori Lightfoot appointing Nicole Lee in this position after the alderman in this ward went to prison for violations of crimes, with 74% in at this time. Nicole Lee with 64% of the vote, with more than 5,000 votes cast for her, as opposed to Anthony Cervino.
That's 3/4 of the vote in, and Cervino is well behind there. 21st Ward here, Cornell Dancer with 51%. This one's close, neck and neck here. 2,418 votes for him, and Ronnie Mosley has 49%. That's 2,329 votes, and just 38% in. So this 21st Ward not even halfway done. Yeah, there are going to be 14 new seats in the alderman seats at City Council. Monique Scott, we know her history, with 50% just half in at 68%, a sizable lead over Creative Scott with 32%. Of course, this is the sister of Michael Scott, who stepped down, and of course was a longtime alderman in that ward. And looking good for the incumbent there.
Yeah. Well, in the 29th Ward, we have Chris Taliaferro with 52% of the vote, with 54% in. C.B. Johnson has 48%, with a little more than 2,400 votes cast for him.
And speaking of the 29th Ward, that's where our Eric Hong is live. Let's check in with him to see how things are going. Good to see you tonight, Eric.
Good to see you, Rob and Cheryl. Chris Taliaferro is seeking a 3rd term after serving for the past 8 years the 29th Ward, which includes multiple West Side neighborhoods, including Austin, Galewood, and Montclair. The 57-year-old Taliaferro, who's a former Chicago police officer and served in the Marines, almost avoided a runoff. He missed the 50% mark on February 28th by a few dozen votes. His opponent, 62-year-old C.B. Johnson, is a longtime community organizer who's led a drug recovery nonprofit. Both candidates agree reducing crime is a top priority, and both want to see more investment in mental health and drug treatment programs. But Johnson, who was supported by Congressman Danny Davis, has accused the incumbent of being absent in the ward and criticized Taliaferro's recent failed bid for a Cook County Circuit Court judge.
Current alderman has always been missing. We might as well put him on a milk carton, because nobody seems to know who he is. Nobody seems to be able to figure out what he done.
My opponent is running for alderman. Does that say he's less committed to the business that he serves or that he has? Even his most staunch supporter, Congressman Davis, ran for mayor and congressman and was unsuccessful. But it didn't mean he was less committed to the people in the area that he served at the time.
Taliaferro is the chair of the powerful City Council Public Safety Committee. He endorsed Brandon Johnson for mayor, but says whoever becomes mayor, he is confident if he wins a third aldermanic term that he will remain the chair of that all-important committee. We're live in Austin. Eric Hong, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Okay, Eric, thanks to you. Our Ravi Beshwal is over at the Magic Board, breaking down a few of the aldermanic races. Let's check in with Ravi, see what he's seeing up there on the map. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Rob, Judy. Cheryl, this is going to be a long night indeed, and we've got the mayor numbers up here, as you just saw. Those are the latest, which I think you just reported. You can see the gap is actually starting to shrink a little bit between the two, Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson. But let's get to those ward maps. And the first thing that I've noticed, actually, with these ward races that you just talked about and all those numbers coming in, pretty much everybody who was leading on February 28th, even though they didn't get 50%, they seem to be leading their races tonight. There are 14 races to watch, 6 incumbents trying to get back into this new council. So let's take a look at just a few of them right now. Let's start with let's go over to just some of the ones I think are the most interesting. Let's go to Ward 36. Gil Villegas, who was actually a deputy who was put in, a former floor leader for Lori Lightfoot. He just barely avoided a run, was just barely nearly got out of having to do a runoff. Pardon me, I got a little tongue-tied there. But now he's doing, actually, as you can see, quite well. 58% over, 42% for Lori Torres-Witt. He was certainly someone that was very important in the Lori Lightfoot administration back then. And this, if you take a look at this map right here, take a look at how this has been remapped over on the far side. I don't know if you can see it very well in yellow. This entire precinct, ward, got rewritten and remapped quite dramatically. He didn't like it very much. He didn't do as well as he might have otherwise done, but still, it seems like he's on his way to a victory tonight. Some of these big wards here on the lakefront, let's take a look at that. Ward 43, Timmy Knutson, also, he was just put in to the city council by Lori Lightfoot maybe 5 months before the election in February. He's doing quite well here tonight. The youngest member of council, 32 years old, an openly gay man. He's beating Brian Comer 52 to 48%. That gap is about the same as what they had back in February, but it was more like 26 to 22%. I'll have to check those numbers. But you can see, again, another example of how the leader back in February seems to be doing quite well here tonight. Ward 45, also up in the far northwest side. This one is very interesting. Jim Gardner against Megan Mathias. Jim Gardner has come in for some criticisms about some of his campaign rhetoric, some of his campaign strategies. Very sharp kind of a race that's going on right there. He seems to be doing quite well with 55% of the vote right now up in the northwest side. And I want to show you two more really quickly here. Angela Clay and Kim Walsh going at it here in Ward 46, right downtown, right towards the lake right there. Angela Clay lost this seat by some 300 votes back in 2019. So she's looking to be able to finally get onto city council, trying to overcome Kim Walsh, who is a former political operative and also an executive with a big drug chain. And that has been a very hard-fought race that's going on there. And finally, in Ward 48, this is a very close race as well indeed. Again, one of these lakefront wards where you've got Lenny Mana Hoppenworth, 51% over Joe Dunn, 49%. That's interesting because Joe Dunn actually was leading this one going into on February 28th. So that's really the only exception to that observation I had a little bit earlier. So let's go to the special report now. We've got a lot of news going on here tonight. Go.
As it turns out, virtually everybody that has looked at this case, including rhinos and even hardcore Democrats, say there is no crime and that it should never have been brought. Never have been brought. Even people that aren't big fans have said it. They said this is not the right thing to do.
All right, let's go to Rachel Scott, who's in the room in Mar-a-Lago. That is the first reaction to what, again, is an unprecedented day in U.S. history, which is why we're on the air to offer that reaction. We listened in until the moment when he specifically addressed this case, what played out today. And I know, Rachel, you've also been listening to a litany of complaints that he's had before. You'd have to fact check in real time. We're not going to do that now. But in particular relation to this case, to what he went through today, to what we watched unfold today, he made a point of saying to the crowd gathered there in Mar-a-Lago that Alvin Bragg, the district attorney here in Manhattan, he believes is politically motivated and ran on a campaign, he said, to go after the former president.
Exactly, David. He said before Alvin Bragg even took the position as district attorney that he was out to get him from the very beginning. The former president's goal tonight is to paint this as purely political. In fact, he called for all of the charges to be dropped immediately. And David, I'm struck by just a remarkable change in tone this is. We saw the former president stoic as he entered and left the courtroom. Well, then within hours of being charged, criminally charged with serious felonies, he entered this room in what honestly feels very much like a campaign-style event. He worked the room, shaking hands, waving to supporters as he took his time and made his way up to the stage to chants of USA, USA. And at the very mention of the district attorney, the crowd here started booing. This is a former president who is defiant. One source described him as determined, up for the challenge tonight, and very resolute. But if this is any sign, he is only going to lean into this as we get closer to the November 2024 election, David.
All right, Rachel Scott, who's already covering the race for the White House for us. Rachel, thank you. I want to get right to John Carl, who's been monitoring this with me on the air with me all day today. And John, you and I also took note of the judge in that courtroom, Lower Manhattan, 15th floor of the building, with a warning for the criminal defendant in front of him, the former president, before he left that courtroom today.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary moment where one of the prosecutors actually handed out copies of some of Trump's social media posts calling for death and destruction and threatening the DA, Alvin Bragg. And the judge gave a warning to both sides, saying refrain from any comments, any statements that could incite violence. So, we'll see how Donald Trump is with his attack specifically on the judge. But the judge and the prosecutor expressed concerns about the safety of witnesses, the safety of future jurors, and unsaid the safety of the prosecutors as well.
John Carl has been with us all day. John, really appreciate it. Our thanks to John and Rachel and the entire team. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, Nightline, Good Morning America, first thing in the morning, of course. I'm David Muir here in New York. Good night.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
We're back on the air with our special election night coverage here. Thanks for joining us on ABC 7, wherever you're streaming. We've got to get to the latest numbers because our producer just telling us we've got some new numbers in the race for Chicago Mayor. Take a look at this.
Wow. 82% in. Citywide, 50-50 right now. Separated by a little bit, 2,000 votes. 400. Let's bring in our analysts. We have to talk about this. 82%. Oh, we're going to go to Leah instead. All right, Leah's in the 11th ward, and we're going to get an update from Leah. But these are some interesting numbers. Leah, how's it going where you are?
Well, those are interesting numbers, and people are watching interesting numbers in this ward, certainly. Here in the 11th ward, it's 5 different neighborhoods that make up this ward. And right now we're in Chinatown, and this may be the story of what happens here this evening. We are in the 11th ward that was newly redrawn so that Chicago would have its first ever Asian American majority ward. And that is exactly what's happened. We are here at this restaurant where you can see so many folks who have worked for Nicole Lee. Of course, that is one of the candidates. We started in February with 7 candidates and down to 2 today. The incumbent, Alderwoman Nicole Lee, and first-time political candidate Tony Schiavone. All right, and we have Nicole Lee doing a little cameo right now. I don't know if we're in video or not. This is live television. She just came out, and she's hugging folks. I think she's seeing some of the numbers that we're seeing as well, where she is well ahead. But certainly the night is not over. Nicole Lee was sworn into office a year ago, and she was chosen by Mayor Lightfoot to represent this newly drawn ward that I was talking about, to represent this ward. And she is the first Asian American, first Chinese American to be in Chicago's City Council. A lot of firsts here in this community. And so we should mention that she was an airline executive. She was doing that for many years and also involved with so many different organizations here in the Chinatown area. Her father involved in politics as well. Now, the other candidate that made it to this runoff is Tony Schiavino. He's a Chicago police officer, now an instructor at the academy. His family, he says, has been in Bridgeport for 100 years. He is fifth generation, he says, in the Bridgeport neighborhood. Nicole Lee says she is fourth generation. We have cheers coming out right now as people are starting to see some of these numbers in this very much changing ward, the 11th ward, that of course was a stronghold of the Daley machine for so many years. Both Richard J. Daley, Richard M. Daley, and of course their nephew, who was convicted on corruption charges, as you mentioned. But this is a new day, and this is a change ward. And it looks at this point that Alderman Lee is ahead, and you certainly feel that celebration here in Chinatown. For now, we are live. We'll send it back to you in the studio.
All right, Leah, thank you for that. Yeah, she talked about the redistricting, Canaryville, McKinley Park, Armour Square, Chinatown, Bridgeport. And of course, she talked about the heavy involvement with her father and his history with politics, of course. But right now, we're going to take a quick pause to let our on-air audience join us tonight with much more information. And on the other side of this break, we'll have more analysis for you.
From ABC 7 Eyewitness News, this is a Vote 2023 election update.
Good evening, everybody. Let's take a look at the returns in Chicago's mayoral runoff election.
With 82% of precincts reported, Vallis leads Johnson by just 2,000 votes. We're live at both camps. Let's start with political reporters. Craig?
Supporters are beginning to arrive here at the Paul Vallis headquarters. Vallis himself upstairs watching these returns come in with family and supporters. Earlier, Vallis greeting supporters and voters at Manny's Deli. The election now firmly in the hands of the voters, and it's tight. The Vallis camp not sure if the election will be decided tonight. Robin Sherrill, back to you.
Thank you for that. Now let's go to Sarah Schulte. Is live at Brandon Johnson's headquarters on Chicago's near South Side. Sarah.
Well, Cheryl, as you can see, the election party is underway. Brandon Johnson is very confident that he could pull this off tonight, although campaign advisors tell me that they believe this is going to have a very, very tight finish and that it may come down to some of those outstanding mail-in ballots. Live at the Johnson headquarters, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News, back to you.
Thanks to both. Your live election coverage continues on our website or wherever you stream. Then join us for special election coverage on Eyewitness News at 10. Fire up the computer and smart TV and join us as we stream.
At abc7chicago.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to our very special election night edition of Eyewitness News here at ABC 7 Chicago.
We've got a lot to talk about with the two of you, but first we want to join our reporters out at the Vallis and Johnson campaign. But look at this. It's a dead heat. 82% in. Yeah, you're better at math than me, Cheryl. Was that a couple thousand votes?
Right, just a couple of thousand, maybe 2,044, something like that. But that really, it means it's very close when you 50-50 at 82% in at 7:45, 45 minutes after the polls closed. This says a lot. So let's go live to Craig Wall tonight. He is live at the campaign headquarters for Paul Vallis at the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Chicago. All right, Craig is gathering information, so let's go live to Sarah Schulte at the Brandon Johnson campaign headquarters at the Marriott on the near south side. Sarah.
Well, Cheryl, as you can see, the party is definitely filling up here. There is a lot of optimism in the air. We spoke with Brandon Johnson earlier today. He is very confident that he can definitely pull this off, although his campaign advisor did just tell me that they think this is going to be an extremely tight finish, may come down to some of those outstanding mail-in ballots. Now, earlier today, Brandon Johnson crisscrossed this entire city. He began by voting at about 7:30 this morning. Then he hit multiple campaign stops, multiple polling places. He also went to Manny's Deli, which is kind of the tradition and on election day. The 47-year-old former teacher, union organizer, and Cook County Commissioner, Johnson's campaign has been primarily funded by the Chicago's Teachers Union. It's an agenda that he has pretty much adopted during this entire campaign, one that talks about investments on the south and west side, affordable housing, investments on mental health, and these have also been consistent talking points for Johnson, although he has been pretty much short on details on some of these things as well, except with the fact that he said it will probably be partly paid for with an $800 million tax hike on the rich and corporations. Now, Johnson received about 21% of the vote last February, and he believes a slight spike in the youth vote is going to be able to kind of put him over the top. We did just look at the Chicago Board of Elections. The youth vote is still pretty low, just under 4%, but higher than it usually is. That's the latest here at the Johnson campaign. Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News, back to you.
A little bit of a buzz starting over there.
Yeah.
Well. We want to talk to our analysts here.
While we wait for Craig Wall to come back.
Yeah, we'll see what Craig's doing. Laura, it's a dead heat. I mean, it's tied.
Well, we knew it was going to be tight. It's been tight for weeks if you've been looking at the polls. You know, it was, 4%, it was 2% difference a week or so ago. It's a highly competitive race. The interesting thing about it is that you're talking about two very different kinds of candidates at opposite ends of the political spectrum, and both of them started to come toward the middle in terms of their policy positions, but they're still pretty much on opposite ends. So the fact that this is so close is really not that much of a surprise.
Okay. Yeah.
What is interesting, too, on top of that, is that while Vallis raised about twice as much money as Johnson did, so much of Johnson's money came from the unions, really all but $1 million out of about, I think, $8 million or something like that he raised altogether. And it does tell us something about who is supporting him and also possibly what sort of mayor he would be if he recovers those 2,000 votes by the time all the ballots are counted. So we should pay a little bit of attention to where the money comes from as well.
Yeah, $13 million Paul Vallis spent on the runoff election, $5 million Brandon Johnson spent on the runoff election, $9 million total you were talking about, and about $20 million for Paul Vallis. So does money matter on how much you spend in the ads? Or does the ground game
there
really
were a lot of ads, that's for sure.
And Vallis definitely had the huge advantage in terms of the ad buy. And a lot of his money was coming from corporate interests, from wealthy people. Some of those folks who were not real crazy about Brandon Johnson's plan to tax the wealthy, to tax the corporations. And so and Brandon Johnson, I think, used that as a weapon against Vallis. You know, you're going to be bought and sold by the corporations. So I mean, both candidates had problems in terms of the perception they were going to be held captive. Teachers Union on Brandon Johnson's side, corporate interests on Vallis's side.
Update on the Chicago Board of Election numbers. The turnout at 7 p.m. was 33.2%. 9.2%. That's the total citywide turnout. As we look at that number and continue tonight and look at how close this is, it's going to be wild to think if that was 1 more percent in one direction or the other, it certainly could play into the race for Chicago mayor. There's some suburban races going on as well, and we want to talk about that because we've got some reporters out in a few locations. Here's the city of Joliet, and it looks like Terry D'Arcy is handily ahead here of the incumbent with 64%, although this is so early. Okay, I didn't see that. Just 3% of the vote in the race for the city of Joliet mayor, so quite some time to go in that.
Right. Well, and let's go now to Naperville, where history could be made tonight in the city of Naperville. There are 3 people vying to become the city's next mayor. This race, including a longtime public servant, a local businessman, and a woman looking to break barriers.
Yeah, there's Mark Rivera live in Naperville for us. Mark, what's going on?
Hey, Rob and Cheryl, good evening. Yes, this excitement is palpable in this room. The provisional results just came up on the monitor behind me with Benny White in the lead over Scott Worley and Tiffany Stephens, and the room just erupted. Obviously, we do have a long way to go tonight. We've got a lot of mail-in ballots to count as well, but very encouraging for the candidate who is projecting a lot of confidence here. For the first time in 8 years, Naperville will have a new mayor. Of course, you mentioned this, Councilman Benny White, facing off against businessman Scott Worley, who has deep ties to this community, and also running is Tiffany Stephens, who may be a spoiler candidate depending on what happens tonight. She's polling in about 3% so far of the votes cast. Meanwhile, businessman Scott Worley, whose family has deep ties here in Naperville, voted this afternoon. Both he and White are running on campaigns that put public safety first, business and commerce second tier, but up there as well. Although Worley says his business expertise and experience as a part-time Park District police officer set him apart from his opponents. He says he can have peer-to-peer conversations to bring in business and knows what police officers deal with on the streets. But for his part, Benny White, a West Point graduate who spent decades in the service in the Army, says he is totally qualified to lead this city and its police force. Also touting efforts to raise tax revenue for the city. Tiffany Stephens got a late start to the campaign, polling far behind the other 2 candidates. But here's what they all had to say just before the polls closed. White thinking about his late father, who grew up in the Jim Crow South.
And I looked over at his picture and just tears started running out my eyes, thinking that, man, what would he be thinking right now if he were here witnessing this? So I know he's looking at me right now. He still lives in my heart.
I think anybody who loves this community understands that having a safe place to raise a family and have an opportunity to have a great education for your kids, those are very, very important for all of us here.
Anybody that's willing to go out there and serve the community, never be afraid. Never be afraid, no matter what people tell you. Never let anybody tell you that you can't do something.
Again, if elected, Benny White would be the first black mayor of Naperville, making this a historic race possibly. One other point that sets these candidates apart from each other, Benny White was on the council when Naperville passed that very controversial assault weapons sale ban. Scott Worley says that ban does nothing to protect the city of Naperville from a mass shooting. When they passed that, that was in the wake of the Highland Park massacre. Obviously, White said they had to do something. A lot more to come here in the western suburbs. We will be here for it. We'll bring it to you live in Naperville. Mark Rivera, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you in the studio.
Okay, ways to go out there. We want to look at the numbers. We actually have some of the numbers in on the race for Naperville mayor, so if you have those, we can take them. Benny White, you see there with 51%, but this is just early, 1% of the precincts in. 7,400 votes for him. Scott Worley with 6,800 and Tiffany Stephens with 417. As those returns in DuPage and Will County come in, we'll continue to keep you posted.
For now, we want to move over to Judy Sue. She's standing by with a special guest in our studio. Judy.
Yeah, you guys, really interesting right now watching the results come in. A number of people will be joining me here tonight. I want to bring in Jaime Dominguez at this point, political science professor at Northwestern University. He helped to lead several of the polls and studies prior to this election. Professor Dominguez, thank you so much for joining us tonight. First of all, your reaction to the polls right now, the race for mayor tied at 50%.
That's just what our poll said. They were neck and neck at 44%. That was a couple of weeks ago. I said this morning on Univision and CBS 2 Chicago that this was probably not going to be determined tonight. I think the mail-in ballots we're going to have to wait for those. But again, this is basically, if you look at it from a macro perspective, it was really about the moderate kind of established technocrat in Paul Vallis versus the perhaps less experienced, but perhaps more progressive candidate with new ideas, perhaps that that could resonate with the electorate. So, am I surprised? Not at all. But there's still a lot of votes to come in, and so we'll see how it plays out. But again, I think it's going to go on past tonight.
And Professor, I want to ask you a little bit more about that poll that was released by Northwestern University Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy. It found that the wild card in this mayoral race could come down to the Latino vote. So explain a little bit more why that is.
Well, because of the fact that you had, in terms of where the Latino electorate stood, you basically had a third of the electorate that was supporting Paul Vallis. These are mostly voters, again, that are just more comfortable, or perhaps they were anchored or are more invested in the administrations of previous mayors, such as Rahm Emanuel, Richard M. Daley. So you have that kind of secure lock vote, I think, that Vallis had from the beginning. Then you have the more kind of old progressive moderates, which we call kind of the Chuy Garcia voters in our poll. And these are voters, again, that it wasn't overwhelmingly for one candidate or the other. Yes, Vallis had the advantage. We're talking about perhaps a 5 to 6 point advantage, which again, that could be erased on election day. And then you have the other third, which is something that we're seeing just is a phenomenon of the city council, where you're having this surge of new leadership, young leadership, people that or candidates and soon to be elected officials that want to challenge the Democratic political establishment, so that the decisions, the agencies that make decisions, that have budgets that affect the lives of city residents, that it's responsible or receptive to that. So you basically have this kind of tripart electorate. And again, I had made an argument that it was really going to come down to, if it was neck and neck as we predicted, that turnout in the Latino ward was, I think, could tilt the election for either Brandon Johnson or Paul Vallis.
I want to ask you a little more about the endorsements. You mentioned it. How key would you say Congressman Chuy Garcia's endorsement was for Brandon Johnson?
I think what it did is, in the short term, it kind of solidified the progressive vote. Granted, the progressive vote is not linear. I mean, there's range in terms of what it is and what it means to be progressive. So I think what that did is it brought those voters who perhaps weren't comfortable with Brandon Johnson, really thought that Chuy Garcia perhaps was more kind of in the center. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson, these voters actually felt that, right, their policy preferences and was more aligned with the Brandon Johnson platform and campaign.
And Professor, what about the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce's support for Paul Vallis? Economic concerns, as you know, another major concern for Latino voters.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, traditionally, Chamber of Commerce, no matter where you're at in the country, tend to lean more conservative. They're about providing entrepreneurialism, creating a strong tax base, creating infrastructure, improving or supporting capital improvement projects. No doubt about that. That's very, very important, I think, for everybody. But in terms of just the effect that has on voters and those voters that are kind of on the fence, I don't think it has much of an effect.
Professor Dominguez with Northwestern University, thank you so much for your time tonight. We'll continue to watch these results.
Thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Appreciate your time. All right, Rob and Cheryl, back to you guys.
Oh, we're excited that you have a lot of returning guests that you did. The first time we did this in late February, offering so much insight.
Right.
So we appreciate them being with us tonight. One of the most closely watched city council races is in the 45th Ward, where incumbent Alderman Jim Gardner is up against small business owner Megan Mathias. The 45th Ward covers parts of the city's northwest side.
So let's take a look at the results at this hour. We're approaching the 8 o'clock hour in the 45th Ward of Chicago with 100% of the vote in.
Yeah.
Well, we're just going to read you the numbers. We can't confirm anything. We're just going to read to you what's happening. Jim Gardner, the incumbent, with 55% of the vote, with nearly 9,000 votes cast on his behalf, with Megan Mathias at 45%, with more than 7,000 votes cast on her behalf. So let's go to ABC 7's John Garcia live tonight with the latest on this. John, what are you hearing for confirmation?
I'll tell you what, they've been following these results very closely here. In fact, Jim Gardner is speaking up in the front right now, but they have been cheering, been loud cheers every time some of the numbers go up, and they're feeling very, very good tonight. Nothing official at this point. We'll let you take a look around the room, though. Jim Gardner almost won this race without a runoff. In February, he had 49%. He, of course, needed 50%. The runner-up in that race, Megan Mathias, had about 17%. She's up to about 45% tonight, but again, it is looking like Jim Gardner is going to pull this out. He is with a lot of the supporters here at Vaughn's Pub on the northwest side. He says it's been a really good race. He's learned a lot. He's been through some scandals that have been very difficult, but he is looking forward right now.
The response that we get from most residents has been very positive. Anytime you're in a campaign, you're going to have challenges, as we have, but for the most part, a lot of the people are very appreciative of the work that we do, and we're excited. We're grateful to be in this position.
The biggest part of my campaign is community voice, listening to the neighbors, understanding their needs, and developing policy around that. That is not I would say that's not my opponent's strong suit. My leadership style is about ethics and integrity and understanding what people want before you make decisions.
Big cheering going on right now as Jim Gardner is speaking to a lot of his supporters. But Megan Mathias told me she was feeling pretty confident earlier. She thought that this ward was ready for a change. It turns out that apparently that is not the case, because Jim Gardner is cruising to re-election with about a 10-point lead right now. We, of course, will hear more from him as this, if what looks to be final, it's not final at this point. They've been no conversations between the two candidates. But once that happens, we, of course, will have that for you live. Live right now in the Northwest Side. John Garcia, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you.
John, looks like the incumbent there with a 10 percentage point lead. Most of the incumbents doing very well tonight. We'll talk more a little bit about that, but we want to go to the mayor's race. Bring back ABC 7's Roy Baseball with a closer look at a few results. But start with the mayor for us, would you mind?
Sure would. Not a problem there, Rob. But take a look here. The numbers still saying 50%, 50%. But what's flipped here is the slight little bit of a margin here for Brandon Johnson right now, sitting on top by about by just over 1,000 votes at this hour. And you can see 88% of the precincts are reporting at this hour. So we're starting to get down to the last strokes, making sure that those last votes are counted. And obviously this brings into question all the mail-in votes, all the early votes, making sure that every single vote is counted and making sure that we get to all of those. So that will be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens with respect to turnout as well. Taking a look at the ward races, earlier I was telling you that it appeared for the most part that those who had won, who had come into first place during the February 28th election, actually were leading most of their races, and that remains true, but there are a couple of different ones to watch out for. Lamont Robinson, Prentice Butler here in the 4th ward, that's a perfect example of that. But take a look at Ward 29. We checked in a little bit earlier with our Eric Hong, and this is a very interesting thing because Chris Taliaferro is the incumbent, and as you can see, he is behind just by 90 votes, but in terms of the percentage, he's behind by 2 points. Community organizer C.B. Johnson ahead of him. Chris Taliaferro, of course, a committee chair and a strong voice in the previous council, and also talking again about how important it is to make sure every write-in vote, for example, is counted. He nearly won, Chris Taliaferro, back on February 28th with over 50%, but then some of the write-in votes came in, or the late votes, or the late votes that came in afterwards, and they actually dropped his percentage in terms of how much he had over all the others to below 50%, forcing him into the runoff. And take a look at his situation now. So we'll be watching that. Look for Eric Hong's report on that. We've got in the 30th ward a very close race here, 4 percentage points between Ruth Cruz and Jessica Tira's there. And some of the other ones we have been watching here, Gilbert Villegas, again, a return and an incumbent who's trying to get out from underneath having to run for this runoff. And he's doing actually quite well here tonight, 58% to 42%. He nearly also avoided a runoff, but was not able to do so. And I want to just jump down to Ward 48 here. We've been watching this one earlier tonight. Joe Dunn, and now has kind of closed the gap. This is the gentleman, community organizer in the 50th ward on the lakefront, who actually came in first place on February 28th. He was behind maybe a half an hour ago. And as we see, 94% of the precincts reporting every single vote is going to count in this 48th ward, just like they do all around the city. Back to you. guys.
All right, Ravi, very comprehensive. Thank you so much for that tonight. Now let's go to Chicago's 4th Ward. 2 candidates facing off to fill the position there. Alderperson Sophia King's seat, of course, she ran for mayor. The 4th Ward covering parts of the Loop and the south side of Chicago.
Let's take a look at the results with you. That'll be the first time we're seeing them here since early on this evening. Lamont Robinson looks to have 67% of the vote. 79% of the precincts in here, or of the vote in, and Prentice Butler with 33%. Lamont Robinson has a sizable lead here in the 4th Ward.
Yeah, at this time. So ABC 7's Michelle Gallardo covering this race for us tonight. Michelle, how's it going where you are?
Hey, Cheryl, how are you? Well, you know, like you said, I mean, the results are pretty comprehensive right now. It's 79% of the vote counted. State Representative Lamont Robinson certainly seems to be heading to victory. And this is not really a surprise coming into today. He was the front runner in this race, having gotten just over 46% of the vote during the February election, a race that began with 6 candidates back in the fall after Sophia King decided not to run for re-election in order to run for mayor. Now, this is the first aldermanic run for both him and the other contender, Prentice Butler. Robinson, of course, made history in 2019 after becoming the first openly LGBTQ black state lawmaker in Illinois, while Butler is Sophia King's chief of staff and a well-known member of the 4th Ward office for the last decade. But again, that appears not to have mattered, that race appearing to be mostly wrapped up at this point, and as you can hear, people starting to cheer as they are getting those results right now. And we are expecting State Representative Lamont Robinson to come down and meet with his supporters any minute now. And of course, we will have that for all of you later on in the show. For now, live in Hyde Park, I'm Michelle Gallardo, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you.
Hearing some cheering there.
No, we can
Michelle
hear
is.
Michelle. All right.
Let's take a look at the mayor's race again here in the city of Chicago. We've got some new numbers in. We want to check those out with you. It's been neck and neck, 50%. In fact, Rubby was showing us that Brandon Johnson has pulled ahead slightly. Here's a closer look at that, and it does look to be the case.
Yeah, about 1,000, perhaps 10 votes. 1,010, 15, something like that, which, you know, in the scheme of things, you know, we still have a long night ahead of us, only 88%. 12 more percent, and it's only divided by 1,000 plus votes. Really, that's neck and neck at this hour. So
a lot could happen.
Let's bring in our analyst to talk about this. Why do you think this is happening? We have been talking, we talked with Craig and Sarah all night, and people were changing their narrative that it could take longer than tonight to determine who will actually be the next mayor, the 57th mayor of the city of Chicago. Talk about what could happen. We have had 5 mayors come from that ward, the 11th ward here. That is the ward for Paul Vallis, of course. Brandon Johnson coming from the west side of Chicago, 3 children, his wife Stacy, Paul Vallis, his wife Sharon. Her birthday is today. So anything is possible in the next several hours, but 50-50 with 88%.
Yeah, and we need to begin turning our attention to the mail-in and early voting results. And there are about 300,000 votes expected from mail-in and early voting. And we don't know yet what the breakdown of that will be, but some of the early voting tallies were coming from wards that favor Vallis, probably 19, 41, and 47 had a lot of early voting activity. But we don't know where the mail-ins come from, and we don't know the mix right now of mail-in versus early voting. So that at some point, that looks like we're going to need to be talking about that, because it doesn't look like it's going to get settled tonight.
What is the ramification of a lawsuit? How many votes can determine where it goes? Could it be a lawsuit if the margin of error is so small between the vote percentage?
Well, I think there's, and maybe David, you know the specifics, but I know there's a legal measurement that it has to be within a certain margin in order for you to make a legal claim. Mm-hmm. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, but it's looking very much like we are not going to get a final decision tonight. If that trend, that 50-50 trend continues until all the votes are counted tonight, that means we're going to have to wait for the additional mail-in votes. And as I understand it, at last count, there was something like 91,000 applications for early voting were out, according to the Board of Elections. So not all those applications are going to come back, but even if 50,000 of them came back, that could make a difference, again, depending on where those numbers are coming from. In terms of what happens if it ends up 50-50, but the 50 plus one wins, and whoever that is, we're going to have a city that's going to be very divided, clearly, and it's going to be much more of a challenge for whoever wins to govern, because they're not going to have a mandate, unlike Lori Lightfoot, who last time around took every ward in the city. So that's going to make it much more challenge, and we're going to continue to have some of these major debates about policy and what's the right direction for the city to go.
And whoever wins, it will be wild to see with the incumbents in city council how this plays, no matter who becomes the next mayor. I want to ask you guys a little bit later, because we want to go to Craig Wall here in a minute, about this incredible run for Brandon Johnson, all the way up to where he is now tied in a dead heat with Paul Vallis, and that's where Craig Wall is. It looks like you have a guest, Craig.
Yeah, we're here with Tom Tunney, the 44th Ward Alderman, who's calling it quits, and he's saying he's glad he's not running for re-election. But Tom, give me your take right now. This is a dead heat. Actually, Brandon Johnson up by about 1,100 votes. Did you see this coming?
Well, we knew it was going to be close, for sure. This close, probably not. But we'll see. We got 10% left. We got mail-in, and I think that I think Paul's run a great campaign, and I'm not confident, but I'm hopeful that he will be our next mayor.
Yeah, so I think the Board of Elections said about 92,000 votes still outstanding. They estimate about 52%, half of them or so are going to come back.
Right.
How do you see Paul doing with these mail-in ballots?
Well, we knew mail-in was going to be really important. So getting our organizational strength, with COVID, with people, spring break, Jewish holidays, it could be up in the air, so I knew that Paul felt that we needed to be organized on all levels, so we'll see. But, the other side thinks that, there's a lot of teachers on spring break, and they might be, have put their vote in before today, so we'll see.
My colleague Laura Washington was talking earlier about what this is going to mean for the next mayor in dealing with the city council. If they're coming in with a razor-thin victory, whether it's Paul Vallis or Brandon Johnson, what is that going to mean, and how difficult is that going to be for this mayor to lead?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot had a difficult time herself, and when she came in with a landslide. So the dynamics are completely different. The council is moving from more of a centrist to further left. That's why I always felt having a chief executive that was more of a moderate, to be able to manage all these diverging interests. So, I'm a little concerned that the city will move way to the left with the Brandon Johnson, and I don't think that's good for the check and balances, which the chief executive needs to do every day.
Tom Tunney, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your insight. We'll be watching like you will tonight. Guys, back to you.
Okay, Craig, thank you very much. We want to take a look at the suburban races. We'll get to the mayor of Chicago, but here's some new numbers in for the city of Naperville. This is DuPage and Will counties, just 6% in, but Benny White still has now a smaller lead at 50% to Scott Worley at 47%, and Tiffany Stevens at 3% there.
Yeah,
6%
DuPage and Will counties, of course, counting, and you never know, some of the different areas still have to be counted, and the numbers are still small with just 6% in, and it's almost about 8:15 tonight. So we have a long way to go in the city of Naperville. Let's check out the mayor in Joliet that raced there in Kendall and Will counties, now with 17%, Terry D'Arcy with 62%, almost 5,000 votes cast on his behalf, with Bob Odenkirk at 28%. It's a very wide margin there for the incumbent. There was, again, only 17% of the votes cast in Ticey Bell with 10%, with 795 votes cast on behalf of Ticey Bell.
Now, back here in Chicago, just briefly, because we only have about a minute to go here before we want to step away. This is really close for Brandon Johnson, who got the CTU support, Laura, and that they're active. They really went out and helped him campaign here.
This is the third time that the Chicago Teachers Union has tried to elect a mayor, and this was really where the rubber was going to meet the road. They put so many resources into this race at their own peril. Some of their own membership is very unhappy about the way they spent their money, but that money that looks like was well spent. For Brandon Johnson to get this close. Brandon Johnson came from nowhere. He was an obscure Cook County commissioner, former teacher, was not well known, but he campaigned hard, and it's brought him very close.
Very close. Maybe the next mayor of Chicago.
CTU had a lot on the line here because we're going to have an elected school board by the end of this mayor's first term. And Paul Vallis has said that he would be putting up candidates to contest the candidates that are expected to be put up by the CTU. Brandon Johnson has made clear that he'll follow the lead of the CTU. And so if Brandon Johnson ends up being mayor, it's more likely than not that the elected school board will end up being dominated by CTU-backed candidates.
It's such an important part of this. I'm glad you mentioned it. We're going to take a quick pause to let our on-air audience join us, but we'll be right back here with you in just a few minutes.
From ABC 7 Eyewitness News, this is a Vote 2023 election update.
We are getting more results in the race for Chicago mayor.
And as expected, it is a tight race right now with 90% of the precincts reporting Brandon Johnson now leading Paul Vallis by nearly 4,000 votes. Johnson is gaining a lot of momentum in this race.
Another mayoral race we're watching out for, Naperville. Take a look right now. Betty White leads Scott Worley by more than 500 votes. The winner will replace two-term mayor Steve Chirico. A reminder, you can find results from all the local races on our website at abc7chicago.com. Hope you can join us where we're streaming because we're just getting started there, Cheryl.
And as a reminder, everybody, our coverage continues online at abc7chicago.com or wherever you stream. Of course, we will have full coverage tonight on Eyewitness News at 10 o'clock and live updates throughout the night right here on Channel 7.
Welcome back to our extended coverage. David and Laura are permanent guests on this show. We love to talk to them. But Judy Sue also has had some terrific guests over the election season, and she's got a familiar face with her as we talk about tonight's election.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been watching the results, too. I want to focus now on one of the most hotly contested aldermanic races this time around in a neighborhood that really carries a lot of political clout in Chicago. We're talking, of course, about the 11th Ward, which includes Bridgeport and Chinatown, also now home to Chicago's first Asian American majority ward in City Council. Joining me now, Grace Chan McKibben, Executive Director of the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. Your thoughts on the return so far in this ward, not officially called, but with, I think, 96% of the votes in, Alderwoman Nicole Lee leading by a wide margin.
Yes, the last time I checked, 21 of the 23 precincts were in, and she's leading by a wide margin, 60-something to 30-something%. I think we are getting very close to calling to calling it.
Okay, well, perfect timing right now. I'm getting word that Nicole Lee might be at the podium at her party here tonight. Perhaps she is ready to make her acceptance speech. I'm not sure. Is that going on right now?
Is that going on right?
I'd ask, and what would they say if they could talk to us today? Would they take the microphone? And I know some of us do talk to our ancestors. I got family members, you know you do too. But what would they say to us on this night? Would they say that we're doing enough? Would they say, I did hair. I washed so many pounds of laundry by hand. I faced violence in these very streets. I baked bread. I made dumplings. Washed the dust off the stockyards from the faces of rosy-cheeked children. And had my school lessons interrupted by the Stearns Quarry with clocks falling from the wall. Do any of you remember that? Do we have people in the room that remember? Do you honor us with your actions? I think that tonight, because of all of you, we would get their praise and probably give them a bit of a surprise. You know, a Chinese woman on the City Council of Chicago, representing the 11th Ward. I think they'd say good work. Little surprise, but good work. But let me be the first to say that even though we have a victory tonight, the work is not done. It's just starting. Until the humblest voice is heard, the same as the loudest, we've not done enough. I think we all know that. It is a heavy burden, but luckily it's not our job to finish the work. Our job is just to continue it, and I'm happy to play my part in continuing that work. We did just that tonight, and we moved history forward, everybody. Here's where I get to the thank yous. And I know I'm gonna miss people, and if I miss you, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what day of the week it is right now, but please know that I'm ever grateful for everybody. Excuse me. I want to thank my campaign team, led by Vince Arrigo. Where are you, Vince? Big round of applause for Vince Arrigo. Carlos Diaz. Christy Katz. Joanna Klonsky. And great friends like John R. Daly. And many others. I want to thank you, Joe McMullen. Where's Joey? John McDonough. Larry Mooney. Tommy Bruno. Smitty. He has a first name, it's Tony, but he's Smitty to me. Bobby Canatello. Both Bobbies. Randy Jew and Chris Wong. Oh my God, thank you. No campaign has ever been so lucky as mine to have partners like Randy Jew and Chris Wong from Athena Design Group. Dominic Lai, where are you? Dominic. Gavin, Keely, and the entire Chu family. Thank you for pounding the pavement through snow, through sleet, through rain, and God knows what else to get out the vote for us. Thank you to the leaders of the Asian American community who have supported my candidacy from the start and who have contributed in so many ways to my success. Ernie Wong, Eileen Chin, one of my oldest friends. Josina Morita, are you in the house? I didn't see her, but Josina Morita. David Namkong, you're here. David, thank you. Tang Xiao and Pin Ni, Sam Ma, Jimmy Lee, Frank Chen, Anita Lau, and so many others that I know I'm forgetting. Again, please forgive me. I really think that it's still Tuesday, right? Thank you to my family and friends and every volunteer. I'm ever grateful for your dedication and commitment. And I promise I'm almost done, but there's so many people to thank. Like I said, this was not done alone. Thank you to all the organizations and leaders who endorsed our campaign, including AFSCME Council 31, the Asian American Caucus PAC, the Chicago Federation of Labor. I see Don Villar right there. Andrea Kruger, thank you, CFL. Thank you to Labor overall for entrusting me with your endorsement. Citizens Action United, Citizen Action Illinois, the Illinois Nurses Association, IATSE Local 2, who was the first union to endorse me. Thank you, IATSE. We've got some stagehands in the house. IBEW Local 134, the International Operating Engineers Local 150 and Local 399, the Iron Workers, the Laborers, the Carpenters, SEIU, Teamsters, the Sierra Club, Personal PAC, Chicagoland Chamber, and so many more. Thank you also to former Mayor Richard M. Daley. Thank you, Chairman John P. Daley. Who I could not be more proud to call my colleague, and more importantly, to be my friend. Thank you to Governor Pritzker, Senators Durbin and Duckworth, Congressman Danny Davis, and Roger Krishnamurthy.
Alderwoman Nicole Lee there in the 11th Ward, now making history as the first Asian American woman elected to Chicago City Council, Grace, because she was appointed before by Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
That's right. She was appointed a year ago by Mayor Lightfoot, and now she won outright.
The Asian American population grew by some 29% since 2010. What does this moment mean for the community?
I'm hoping that it will be a watershed moment similar to when we elected Theresa Ma to the General Assembly in 2016. We worked really hard to redistrict at the state level in 2010 and now also at the city level in 2020 to have a majority Asian American ward. Now, the idea was to have the Asian Americans be able to have their voices be unified and they can elect somebody of their choice.
I want to ask you about another ward, in the 48th Ward, something else exciting going on there, another potentially history-making moment. Why is that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Lenny Mana Hoppenworth is neck and neck with Joe Dunn right now, and if elected, she'll be the first Filipina in City Council. So we would have two Asian American women in City Council.
And right now, I believe that is still 50% to 50% in the 48th Ward. Back to the 11th. What does this mean for the potential of having a high school finally in the Chinatown area?
Well, Nicole completely believes in the high school. She herself had worked on the project since she was an LSC member with two little kids in the public schools, and we're hoping that she'll continue to champion for it. I'm a little bit worried because the community has asked both Mr. Vallis and Mr. Johnson about the high school, and they both have said that they need to take a wait and see, and I really hope that they'll come around and support it.
The 11th is a very diverse ward. We have been covering that during the campaign. A lot of emotions went into this campaign. It wasn't easy. Hopefully Nicole Lee now can bring everybody together.
She is very good at bringing people together. Of course, she'll champion the causes for Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, but she has the ability to bring the entire ward together, and I think that she'll be successful in that.
Grace Chan-McKinven, thank you so much for joining us once again here tonight. Again, we're talking about the 11th Ward and Nicole Lee winning that race. Back to you guys.
How about that timing, ladies? Right when you're talking, she's talking about history for sure.
Continues to be recorded.
Yeah, we've got our team of reporters out, and Sarah Schulte is with the Johnson campaign. We haven't checked in with her in a little bit. It looks like that room is filling up, Sarah.
Oh, it sure is, Rob. I'll tell you, There was a lot of excitement in the air when the latest poll numbers came out. Everybody gathered towards the TV and just started cheering. Certainly, as we know, that Brandon Johnson did not do this alone. He was strongly supported by teachers, especially the Chicago Teachers Union, that not only funded his campaign, but got out the ground troops to knock on doors, to text messages, to send out mailers, to do events for him. A part of that, of course, are not just the Chicago's Teachers Union, but teachers statewide. Joining me right now is Dan Montgomery, who is president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. What's going through your head right now?
Wow, excitement. Everybody's exhausted, but as you said, Sarah, our folks got out and worked. They saw in Brandon a teacher. He really is a teacher, and that's historic. But not only a teacher, someone who believes in our values, wants to lift up the city. We had people come from far southern Illinois to work today, to work a week ago, to canvass around the suburbs, and we have members who live in the city who aren't CTU. So we're all in, and our national president was here. This is a huge moment in our community to see a teacher become mayor of the third largest city in America.
Now, there is a concern about that. There is a Chicago teacher's contract that is up in a year. There are a lot of people that just don't have the confidence that Brandon Johnson, who worked for the union for over 10 years, was paid by the union for over 10 years, that he can be not biased.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't worry about that. I know Brandon. He's a good guy. He's running, and he will be if he becomes mayor of the whole city. And I think that's true for anyone who's going to become mayor, honestly. All the forces in this great city that pull and push on mayors, and he doesn't negotiate that contract. There are lawyers and folks, and you've got a city council. So I don't think anyone should worry about that.
Although he doesn't negotiate the contract, there are lawyers, but he is certainly involved in signing off on certain things.
It's a contract for the city. In other words, it's a contract. The public schools are here for the citizens of this city, and everybody. There isn't a parent in the city that doesn't want great public schools for their kids.
Throughout the campaign, Brandon has talked about the values that Chicago Teachers Union has been pushing for several years: affordable housing, more investments on the south and west sides, mental health. But he really was a little short on details on all of that. Can you tell us anything more on what he really will do?
I actually think there's a lot of detail on his website. I mean, he put forth more than any other candidate I saw on a lot of fronts: affordable housing, mental health, a lot of supports, a lot more detail. Look, I can tell you one thing he's going to do, and that is make sure that the city reopens mental health centers, that we fully fund our schools as best we can, and that he's talked again and again about getting summer job opportunities, work opportunities, and a full array of summer camp for our youth. And that is a way to help make this city stronger and safer.
All right, thanks, Dan. I really appreciate you joining us. Again, that was Dan Montgomery, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, here at the Brandon Johnson party. Johnson is with his family, his wife and 3 kids, upstairs watching the returns. We told he will be down, but not for a while. Live at the Johnson headquarters, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you.
Okay.
What's going on?
Yeah, undetermined what a while could mean, but we're going to be here with you. We want to take a look at some of the races for mayor out in the suburbs. Let's start with Naperville, DuPage and Will counties. Now 37% in. Scott Worley has pulled ahead of Benny White. You see right here with a little more than 8,900 votes. And then in third, Tiffany Stevens with 3% at 463. So this has shifted as more have come in, Cheryl. Benny White is now trailing Scott Worley.
Yeah, we've been seeing only 3% most of the night, so now there's a huge jump in numbers. It's still close, very close. With now let's go to Joliet for the race for mayor there in the Kendall and Will counties representation. Terry D'Arcy with 60%, with 35% of the votes cast so far. Bob Odenkirk at 30%, and then Tycee Bell bringing up the third place position with 10%, with a little more than 1,000 votes cast on her behalf.
We have a lot of viewers in Kendall, Will County, and also out in DuPage, so we're going to keep an eye on that. But we want to move back to the city of Chicago and the 29th Ward. Eric Hong has been covering this for us. There it is. We want to check back in with him for an update this evening. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Rob and Cheryl, we're at Alderman Chris Taliaferro's office on the west side in the Austin neighborhood, where supporters and staff have been gathered here. They've been watching these returns come in with bated breath, and right now not a lot of votes separating these two candidates, Alderman Taliaferro and his opponent, C.B. Johnson. Taliaferro, 57 years old. He's a two-term alderman from here in the 29th Ward, which encompasses parts of the west side, Austin, Galewood, as well as Montclair and some other communities here on the west side. He's seeking a third term, and he and his opponent, C.B. Johnson, seem to agree on a lot of issues. That crime is the #1 issue here in the ward. Violence prevention, a top priority for both of them. They also want increased investments in mental health resources as well as drug recovery resources here on the west side. But that's where the similarities seem to end, because C.B. Johnson, his opponent, has really taken Taliaferro to task over the last few weeks during this runoff, saying that, accusing Taliaferro of being sort of an absent alderman here in the ward, really going after Taliaferro, who had a failed bid for Cook County Circuit Judge, lost that election, again ran for re-election here in the 29th Ward after losing that bid for judge. But Taliaferro pushing back, saying that he is committed to the 29th Ward, has always been committed, and he hopes after tonight to seek to win a third term. C.B. Johnson just down the block at his campaign office, hoping that he will be the victor at the end of this night. But again, a very close race at this point. We're live in Austin. Eric Holling, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Eric, thanks for
A lot
that.
of close races tonight. Let's talk about the close race.
The big one?
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about the big one.
Here in Chicago. It's very close tonight. Let's take a look at the numbers now here. We're at 8:30, you guys, an hour and a half after the polls have closed. Right now, with 92% of the votes in tonight. Brandon Johnson, former school teacher, 51% of the votes cast. The former CPS CEO, Paul Vallis, with 49%. And it is still early. We've got about 8% more to be counted. But let's talk about those mail-in votes, everybody.
Yeah, we were discussing this a little bit earlier. Chicago Board of Elections says there are potentially 91,000 vote-by-mails that need to be counted. If they're postmarked today, they would be counted when they're received. And you can't assume that all of those will be postmarked by today, but that's a significant number of votes, 91,000.
Applied for
right, exactly.
All of those won't come back.
Right.
And some of those would be maybe counted tonight, but we don't know how many.
And, yeah, and certainly they won't all come back for one particular candidate, sure. But do you think that perhaps favors one of the candidates over the other?
Well, I think what you'd want to do is look at past voting patterns. And as I understand, in the last election, Johnson did well with the early vote. I don't know if that'll hold. It's really hard to know where those votes are coming from. That's why I don't think we're going to be able to have a decision tonight, because you really can't estimate where that vote is coming from, and when it's this close, you just have to wait and count.
Mm-hmm. So, David, we talked earlier about what happens. Can a recount happen? Why a recount can happen? Can a lawsuit happen? Give us all the scenarios, because it is very close tonight.
Well, lawsuits can happen, but the first step would be that either one of these candidates would be close enough under Illinois law to request a recount. They have 5 days to do so after the election, and it would presumably, in an election that looks to be as close as this one could be, that wouldn't be surprising. If there's a recount, then the lawyers get involved, and maybe there would be a lawsuit. But we've seen in other cases where a recount happens and there's no need for a lawsuit. A result is clear after a recount. But let's count those mail-in and early voting ballots. And you mentioned 91,000, which is the number that have been mailed out but have not yet been returned. On top of that, I believe there's another 300,000 or so that are early votes and mail-in ballots that already are in. And I don't think we have results from those yet.
Those would. I thought everything would be counted tonight. Anything that came in today would be counted tonight.
Right. So there will be 91,000 that we're waiting for the next few days.
That's a lot of votes.
Right, that's a lot.
It is, and in looking at how close this is, it could matter. We could have a candidate tonight who has a couple, Brandon Johnson has a lead, and then you get those votes in and it flips it on its head. I mean, we're a long ways from this being over.
Right. We have 8% more of the votes to be counted tonight, 92% in at around 8:30. That was an hour and a half after the polls closed. So perhaps by 10 o'clock, we could have a significant number, but not a winning number.
Right, but things might shift with that 8% because again, it depends on. This is a very demographically divided city, so it depends on if those votes, if the outstanding votes are coming from the northwest and southwest side, that's going to be advantage Vallis. If they're coming from the North Lakefront, if they're coming from the African American wars, it's much more advantage to Johnson.
We talk about that polarization of these candidates, and the FOP came out for Paul Vallis right away, and he gained some momentum from people who support the police, and they come out and vote. Families of police and firefighter, those wards did particularly well. And then CTU steps in, and Brandon Johnson, remember when we had 5 candidates, 6 candidates, 7, and we're getting up to 8 and 9,
right.
and was at 2%, right? I mean, he was
2% 6 months ago.
And now he is in the lead the night of the runoff election. We're going to go back, and there are so many questions on how we even got here. I mean, that's an incredible feat for him to pull off. And I guess my question to you, Laura, is that because CTU got behind him and was so active out there pushing for their candidate?
I think the organizational support in the ground game absolutely makes a huge difference. But I also think that he was a candidate. There's a Chuy Garcia, the CTU could support Chuy Garcia, but Chuy Garcia was not one of them. This is a candidate that comes from their community. He is a teacher. He speaks their language. He's talking about the education issues that they care about. So I think that motivated, beyond just the ground game, I think that motivated people, not only teachers, but people who really care about a progressive way of doing education.
And he was good on the stump.
Yeah.
He was a good campaigner. And if you saw him in front of crowds, he connected with crowds. And so he was a good horse to ride for the union, not just for the reasons that Laura talked about.
He talked about his campaign was built on hope. He is the son of a preacher, so oftentimes you would get a sermon when Brandon Johnson was speaking. Now we're talking about numbers. Paul Vallis 4 years ago was in 9th place.
Right.
You know, but tonight he came in 9th place 4 years ago, but tonight he is in the runoff election against Brandon Johnson.
He's speaking of running good campaigns. He's run a much better campaign than he did last time, much better organized. Paul Vallis always had a hard time focusing because he knows so much about government. He's got all the numbers in his head. He really focused, and particularly focused on public safety, and really made that case in a way that no other candidate, I think, has ever made in recent history. And I think that's why he's where he is right now.
It's been a busy day in the newsroom.
Yes, a lot going on.
And it's not just for politics, because we're watching severe weather. And we want to go to meteorologist Cheryl Scott. And I say that because we've had to deal with some in the past week, Cheryl, but I know you're keeping an eye on what is a thunderstorm warning?
Yes, we have a severe thunderstorm warning that has been issued for LaSalle County here back to the south and west. And we're still looking at the potential here of some strong isolated severe storms as we go into the evening. That's why we are seeing this severe warned storm that did just develop here crossing over I-39 right now. You can see a lot of lightning being detected within this storm, as well as heavy downpours as well. These are moving rather quickly to the north and east at about 40 to 45 miles per hour. But anyone in this zone here, this is where that warning is. It's going to basically ride right along I-80, continuing pushing up to the north and east, 40, 45 miles per hour. Large hail and high winds are the primary threats with this storm, as well as those downpours and lightning associated with this. So as we zoom on in here, this is right on top of LaSalle right now. You can see the deep yellows, the reds. This is indicative of very heavy rain. We're getting some high returns. Hail has been reported with thunderstorm activity all throughout the afternoon, and more hail possible here into the evening. Likely here hail up to 1/4 inch in size, not out of the question. And we are also monitoring the threat of some very strong gusty winds. So this is moving to the north and east at about 45 miles an hour. So out ahead of this, we want everyone to be alert and prepared. It's a good idea to get the cars inside in the garage if you can cover it, because we've seen some hail. The gusty winds as well will continue to work their way to the north and east. Ottawa at about 8:53, Dayton at 8:57, Serena at 9:04, Sheridan at 9:08. We've had a few isolated storms here bubble up throughout the evening hours. So we still are working with some instability. We have a very dynamic storm system that has been moving through. So as we put this all into motion, what we're finding here, we had a very strong storm that was tornado warned just off to the south and west that formed just west of Peoria. That is since it has died out and fizzled. So good news there. But then just to the north of that storm is where we're finding the latest isolated strong storm in our area. So still some isolated activity expected here on the map as we go into the next hour to 2 hours. Now, we've been talking about hail in our region, so let me switch on to the hail parameter here. And we're not seeing the large hail that we were finding earlier within the storms, but you can see as I put this into motion here over the last hour, this storm pops up. There's our hail detector, and that's indicating some penny to dime size hail up to quarter size hail here with this storm, as this is going to continue to lift its way up to the north and east there at 40-45 miles per hour. So that severe thunderstorm warning in effect. In addition, winds picking up with the storm system moving on through. We've had wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour with this storm. A report just coming in of a wind gust up to about 48 miles per hour. So this is a healthy storm right now, not showing any signs of weakening at this moment. Out ahead of it, we have Serena down towards the south there. Streeter, you're to the south of this. This will be staying to the north of you, so riding right along I-80. You can see the lightning here associated with this storm as well, but just want to take that off so you can get a better view of this storm as a whole. And in addition, what we can do is take a 3D slice and a cross section of this storm. This gives us an idea, on the intensity in the updrafts up to about 25,000 feet here. And we've been seeing the hail pour from some of these storms. So some small hail being reported at this point in time. Very heavy rain. The severe weather threat is still with us as we go into the evening. We're going to have all of the updates coming for you at 10 o'clock with more severe weather possible tomorrow morning as you head out the door, and we could find all severe weather modes. We're talking about the threat of isolated tornadoes as well as large hail, high gusty damaging winds as well. So more to come on that, and we'll continue to keep you updated. But for now, just to bring it back home, we do have the severe thunderstorm warning that has been issued for LaSalle, and this remains in effect right now until 9:30. Gusty winds and hail, the primary threats with this storm right now. We'll send it back to you guys.
All right, 45 more minutes for that thunderstorm warning. And it's very interesting. We were talking about how weather can impact an election. It really has a lot to do with it. But some of the meteorologists, including Cheryl today, was talking about how the weather was coming after the polls closed. Yeah. And it's right on time. And that's a good thing because people were able to get out.
What we had Friday, we were sitting here with Cheryl going through some severe weather and tornadoes. And it's good to see that we don't have that as we're looking at some hail, though, and some thunderstorms approaching, and in our viewing area, at least it's not tornadic. So
right,
some relief.
A lot of the coloration there in Naperville and Joliet, where of course they're voting for the mayor tonight as well. So,
I prefer this fabulous green to any sort of dark shades of red and orange on a radar. It's never good. We want to bring back in ABC 7's Ravi Beshwal with a closer look at the results coming in tonight. Ravi?
I'm actually just applauding our amazing weather staff because
they've done a great job.
All right, fantastic.
And like you said, Cheryl, it does have an impact on turnout and where people go and so on. And they've been working like crazy. Larry Mowry's in tonight as well. He's helping out upstairs. I just want to go back to the mayoral numbers very quickly. As you can see now, the gap between Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis, as you've been showing, getting a little bit bigger, over 7,000 votes, 2 percentage points different right now. We'll have to see about what happened with those early votes, with those mail-in votes, and how that actually is affected, who knows, by the weather, if that played a role coming into this. Let's talk a little bit about some of these very interesting ward races right here. And we've been going through this. Lamont Robinson, the state representative, looks like he's going to cruise to victory here tonight. I wanted to show you Ward 11, which was where Judy was talking to her guest a little bit earlier. You can see Nicole Lee, who was caught in a very close race earlier, and it was a surprise back in February, coming through with a really big victory, actually. As you can see, 100% reporting. And so I just step over here, and I now can show you exactly, it's a little more clear what the map really actually looks like. This is what's supposed to be the Asian ward in the city. And here's Bridgeport, and here's Armour Square up here. And there's still really distinct communities within it. But to be able to turn it into what it was supposed to be, at least according to the last remapping in the city's, in City Council's efforts there, is really quite a remarkable actual development here, and a historic development, if you will, in the 11th Ward. So a big victory here for Nicole Lee here tonight. I want to show you something we haven't been talking about here tonight, Ward 30, which is in the city, kind of obscure, kind of up to the northwest above Jefferson Park over there. Haven't heard a lot about Ruth Cruz and Jessica Gutierrez. This is actually an open seat, and it's actually a very close race. You can see only 287 votes here separating the two of them as they vie for what both of these candidates called an entirely chopped up ward. Let's see if we can get in on it. If you know this neighborhood as well, they're very different communities here. There's a lot of Eastern European communities here, some Latino as well. As you can see, of course, we have two Latino candidates right here. But both of these candidates were calling this ward quite chopped up. So it doesn't really have its own identity yet. And there's a very close race going on in there. Where we found Eric Hong a little bit earlier, Chris Taliaferro, a well-known person in council right now, still losing to C.B. Johnson. We'll see about that. And finally, we'll take a look right here. Lenny Mana Hoppenworth, 50%, just a little bit more than Joe Dunn, perhaps the first Filipina to be elected to the Chicago City Council. And so that is a very important note to be able to see here tonight. Taking a look at some of the other lakefront wards. Angela Clay looking like she's going to be cruising to victory here. 96% of the precincts reporting a big lead over Kim Walz. Angela Clay just missed out winning this last time. She'll be probably part of the next City Council. Back to you guys.
Yeah, Robbie, a great breakdown to see those numbers specifically within those wards. It gives you a really inside close look at how they're playing out here as we're getting most of those returns in.
Very important perspective. Of course, in the Chicago's 4th Ward, there are two candidates there facing off. Alderperson Sophia King's seat, of course, she ran for mayor. The 4th Ward covers parts of the Loop and the city's south side.
We want to talk about the mayor's race. You saw those results just a few seconds ago. Listen to that. It sounds like people are excited there, Sarah, at the Brandon Johnson campaign headquarters.
Oh. Well, Rob, you bet they are, especially as those returns keep coming in. I can't tell you how excited people are. Brandon Johnson, when I spoke with him this morning, he was very, very optimistic that he could pull this off tonight. And why he was optimistic is he said he worked hard. Matter of fact, he kept working hard all day today. He had multiple campaign stops. He also had a lot of ground troops behind him as well from the Chicago Teachers Union and also SEIU. They were out and about during this entire time knocking on doors for Brandon Johnson. He also got some big endorsements, including from Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who came out and endorsed Johnson right after the first round of this. What are you feeling tonight?
Feeling cautiously optimistic, feeling the energy of the room. The room represents an inclusive campaign that's looking for comprehensive solutions to Chicago's problems.
Have you spoken with Johnson tonight?
I spoke to him earlier in the day, prior to returns coming in, and told him I was praying for him. I knew he was tired. He worked extremely hard through both stages of the campaign. I appreciated his patience with me and his outreach to me and his willingness to have a conversation with me about constitutional policing, about inclusive, comprehensive solutions to our problems.
This was a really hard-fought, dirty campaign. What will it take for Brandon Johnson, if he does become Chicago's next mayor, to bring this whole city together, especially police? Because, you know, he did talk about defunding police a couple years ago. I mean, how is he going to be able to do that?
So, yeah, defunding police was bad nomenclature. What I think the folks behind the nomenclature meant is investing in community mental health services so that police don't have to do more than their public safety job. And I think that's what Brandon Johnson meant. I had a direct conversation with him about that prior to my endorsement. He said he was willing to invest in mental health services, not only for community, but for officer wellness. Invest in training, invest in an independent staffing study. You heard Paul Vallis talking about hiring a specific number of police officers, but Bob Boyk, who was fired by the police department, had recommended an independent staffing study so we could have a real scientific way of determining how many police officers we have, where to deploy them, and how to do it in the best interest of public safety for the city of Chicago.
All right, Thanks so much. I really appreciate you joining us. As if you can see right here, crowd filling up, lots of excitement in the air here at the Johnson election party. Live in the South Loop, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News, back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's always fascinating to watch as the night goes on, the different headquarters, and how many people come in, who they make accessible to our reporters, and then you can start to feel that energy as this is such a tight race.
Right, I know when we went on the air 2 hours ago, the rooms were empty.
Yes.
But now both rooms have started to fill with people and supporters because it's a close race.
Well, it helps when you're up a couple thousand votes too. It just brings natural energy in. You know, even though we likely may not know who's winning, the Johnson campaign is clearly fired up tonight.
Well, let's talk about the 4th Ward tonight as well. The two candidates facing off to fill Alderperson Sophia King's seat. She ran for mayor. The 4th Ward now covering part of the Loop and the city's south side.
So there you see the results. Lamont Robinson with 66%, Prentice Butler 34%. We've got 89% of the vote in.
And let's go live to ABC 7's Michelle Gallardo. She's covering the race for us tonight. Michelle.
That's right, Cheryl, and this is a room that has definitely filled up over the last couple of hours. State Representative Lamont Robinson, now Alderman-elect Lamont Robinson, coming down about 20 minutes ago to greet his supporters, getting ready to address them right now. And really, this is someone, you mentioned that he was running against Prentice Butler, who was retiring Alderman Sophia King's chief of staff. But that, of course, that advantage, perceived advantage, did not matter because Lamont Robinson has overwhelmingly won this race. And of course, Robinson made history in 2019 when he was elected the first LGBTQ black state lawmaker in the state of Illinois, and he will now become the 4th Ward alderman. A few minutes ago, we were able to speak to him about what his priorities will be once he arrives in City Council.
Number one, we need affordable housing for working folks. We need affordable housing for folks that want to purchase homes, $400,000. And thirdly, we need affordable commercial space. We need to be able to help the 4th Ward businesses to be able to expand. And then secondly, we need to bring in new businesses to our area.
And of course, this will be a very different city council that Lamont Robinson will arrive in. And that was another point that he made, that city council needs to be independent of the mayor, whoever that person is going forward. Live in Hyde Park, I'm Michelle Gallardo, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you in the studio.
Michelle, thank you. I start to like to hear the soundtracks going.
Right, I know. You always think about the music in the background, the celebratory music. Sometimes
captures the mood.
It really does sometimes. And they have special songs that they have lined up. Everybody has a
the
DJ
whole playlist,
on a night like a playlist, of course, on a night like this, an election night. Let's talk about the Chicago's mayor's race again, and let's take a look at those numbers tonight and see how we have progressed. We are now at 95% with the votes cast in this race, in this citywide runoff election tonight. As we said, the former CPS teacher with 51% of the votes with 274,517 versus the CEO of the CPS, Paul Vallis, with 49%, more than 260,000 votes cast on his behalf.
Still likely tens of thousands of mail-in votes,
Right.
too, that will not be counted tonight.
Right.
2 mayor's races out in the suburbs we're keeping an eye on for you, including Naperville. Let's take a look at this. Scott Worley now with my glasses, I can see 90%.
98%?
98%. Thank you, Cheryl. Scott Worley with 13,000 votes, and Benny White coming in second with 11,566, and Tiffany Stevens with 571 votes in. Scott Worley, his family, very powerful out in Naperville, is now carrying that race with almost all the votes in.
Yeah, generational family of social servants there. Now let's go to the Kendall and Will counties representation. The mayor, Joliet, Terry DRC with 61%, more than 8,000 votes cast on his behalf. Bob Odenkirk with 30%, that's just halfway, and Ticey Bell with 9%. Let's go now. We have sound tonight from Bob Odenkirk about this race. I mean, from Terry DRC.
Oh, he's speaking already.
Yeah, let's hear what he has to say.
Let's hear it.
I just want to thank everyone, and I want everyone to remember that I'm a public servant. I want to be the mayor for 150,000 people and all the businesses that are here. And I want to help lead us all in the future with everyone's guidance and partnership. So again, thank you so much for all your support.
His supporters have to be excited as he's got a decent lead in the city of Joliet.
Right, nothing official tonight, but you know, people can kind of feel and they can see, take a look at the numbers at this hour. We are 2 hours after the polls have closed. Judy Sue is, of course, with us tonight as well. She has had some phenomenal guests throughout the night.
Hello again, ladies.
Yeah, I've been running in between the studio and the green room. So joining me now is Dr. Twyla Blackman-Larnell, Associate Professor of Political Science at Loyola University right here in Chicago, where she is also a faculty affiliate of the Institute of Racial Justice. She was with me in February when we were watching the results. Now she is back. Your thoughts so far? When I saw you in the green room, it was 50% to 50%.
Yeah, this is really, really exciting. I wish that 70% more of Chicago's eligible voters was as excited as I was and turned out today. But it looks like it's going to be a really, really close race. And this is kind of impressive. I must admit that I was a little nervous about how this was going to turn out. Paul Vallas is a very established politician, not just here in Chicago, but across the state, the nation as well. He's ran Chicago's budget before, our public schools, as well as public school systems in other big cities also. And so you just wonder if people would be more captivated by someone who they feel is more experienced. But then you have to remember he also has these strong ties to the old Chicago machine. And Brandon Johnson is running as a reformist, pretty similar to Lori Lightfoot, but running on a very different agenda and rhetoric, I feel like.
Well, I do want to ask you, let's take us back a little bit and talk about the runoff campaign, right? Two candidates striking very different tones on some major issues, both with some heavyweight endorsements behind them. What struck you during this campaign for the runoff?
What's really cool about this particular election is that they are both being endorsed by two really big unions or organizations, or labor organizations here in the city of Chicago. Paul Vallas has strong support from our first responders, police particularly, and Brandon Johnson has a substantial amount of support from the teachers union. And these are two very strong constituents within the city of Chicago, also major parts of the municipal employment structure. And they have a lot to say, but they're also on different sides of the conversation about how to deal with things like crime, how to deal with things like schools, right? If you're a reformist like Johnson, we're arguing that investing more in schools and social supports and things of that nature will help reduce crime. But Paul Vallas is running on putting more police on the street, which requires more money that would essentially divert from other social programs and educational programs that Brandon Johnson is putting forth as the reform.
I want to also ask you about race being a factor in this election. We talked about it in February, now of course for the runoff, and also a point of discussion. In the last few days of the campaign, it seems the narrative to some may be creating a racial division in the city. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I don't know if we can say that based on this particular election, because Paul Vallas has obtained a substantial amount of support from Black and brown leaders, also established politicians here in the city of Chicago, the state as well. So I don't know if it's so clear that we have a division of race amongst these candidates. That's not so obvious just yet.
Do you think the new mayor, whoever it is, will have a tough time bringing the different communities together?
I think they will have different difficult times, right? Each one of them are going to have their own trajectory to being able to control and run the city. I think Paul Vallas, again, because of his strong ties to old Chicago, is going to have networks that he can already rely on to be able to kind of maybe get things moving a little bit faster, even if those aren't the policies that you actually support. Whereas Brandon Johnson is going to have to get in, kind of get his feet wet a little bit, right? He still has some appointments he has to make, particularly superintendent of police. There's other big positions that he needs to think about, and also in making the connections and networks, not just with government officials, but also the major players in the private world as well, to be able to get his reforms off the ground.
I know you're going to be staying up and watching the results and see what happens here tonight and maybe for the next few days.
Yes, I think we're going to have to wait at least until tomorrow or the next day to know for sure.
Professor Larnell, thank you so much for joining us. All right, Rob and Cheryl, back to you guys.
Thanks to both of you.
Excellent insight, really important information too to consider, of course, going forward and learning about the information tonight. Well done, Judy.
We've checked in with Sarah Schulte a few times at the Brandon Johnson headquarters. Our Craig Wall is at Paul Vallas headquarters. Let's see what's going on there. Hi again, Craig.
Hey guys, not as much energy here as you might have seen over at Brandon Johnson's headquarters for obvious reasons. The numbers seeming to tilt his way considerably now, close to about 15,000. Have with me here Gary Chico, former school board president and a Vallas supporter. And Gary, when you look at these numbers, what's your first impression?
Well, we got to let them all come in, first of all, right? You got about another 25,000 votes outstanding from today's vote, and you have maybe another 90,000 plus votes to come in from the mail votes. We'll see what that actually turns out to be, but both of those numbers together are much larger than the margin separating these two people right now. So I think, to be fair to the voters, to be fair to both of these candidates, you count all the votes.
But do these numbers surprise you at this point? They're not, notwithstanding the outstanding mail-in ballots.
Oh, we knew it was going to be close. I mean, people have been talking about that, calling it a dead heat for a long time. That's what you're seeing tonight. But I still think you'd have to count every vote, and I think you're going to see Paul want that to happen.
Is there anything you think Paul could have done differently or better in this race?
Oh, I think Paul left it all on the field. He worked tirelessly, stayed on the issues, crisscrossed the city, worked every part of the city. I don't know what else he could have done.
The ground game that CTU brings to Brandon Johnson's campaign. A lot of people had talked about it. My colleague Sarah Schulte had talked about it as well. Do you think that was a big factor in at least the numbers we're seeing at this point?
I don't know yet. You really don't know. You need a little time to analyze that. But I know that Paul and the Vallis campaign had a very robust get out the vote effort as well. So we're going to have to wait to see what the final vote total is to make any of those kinds of analyses.
What do you make of the analysis I'm hearing from some who had looked at the numbers? On February 28th, the vote by mails that came in after that went about 35 to 45% to Brandon Johnson in a 9-candidate field. Now we're down to 2 candidates. Frank Calabrese saying he thinks it may go 2-1 for Brandon Johnson afterwards.
I don't know about 2-1.
Is that a little bold prediction?
No, 2-1. I don't know where he's getting that from. We haven't seen that yet. So I think, again, what you have to do is wait till the votes come in and are counted. I'll tell you, the Board of Elections has some work to do ahead of it, right? You can count votes up to 14 days after today's date, provided those votes are postmarked by today. We don't know what that's going to be. You got to count all the votes.
Gary Chico, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your insight into this race. Guys, we're going to be here, and we may be hearing from Paul Vallis, I'm told by the campaign, sometime between maybe 9:10 and 9:30. What I'm being told is he's going to come down and tell supporters here that there's just too many votes still left to be counted, and he is not ready to concede. Back to you.
Thanks, Craig. I have faith in Chicago Board of Elections, and I'm going to say Gary Chico is hopefully not right, and it doesn't take 14 days to count all these votes because they run a fine-tuned machine there, and we hope they get them in the coming days. We want to talk about that suburban mayor's race in Naperville, though, Cheryl, because we saw these numbers change pretty quickly.
Yeah, with 99% of the votes cast in this race for the mayor of the city of Naperville, Scott Worley with 53% of the vote, more than 14,000 cast on his behalf, and then Benny White with 45%. More than 12,000 cast on his behalf. Tiffany Stevens with just 2% of the vote, 608 votes cast for her. Mark Rivera has been covering this race for us tonight, and let's go back live now to Naperville to get an update and to see if there's any celebrations taking place. Mark?
Oh, there are celebrations taking place here at Scott Worley's campaign event. I'm live over at Empire Bar Grill, which is a different location. Literally just got here less than 5 minutes ago to come in front of this camera and talk to you because, as you mentioned, Scott Worley has taken the lead in this race with 98% of the precincts reporting here in Naperville. Obviously, there are a lot of questions still as to how many mail-in ballots are out there and whether that would be enough if they went to Benny White to overcome the lead that Scott Worley has right now. But a lot of very happy people here at Empire Bar and Grill. Now, Scott Worley is a candidate who is a longtime businessman here in the Naperville community, and as you mentioned, has very deep ties, his family here to this community. He's also touted that experience as a businessman as a way to entice businesses to come to Naperville, revitalizing the I-88 corridor, trying to get more tax money to fund the underfunded Indian Prairie School District 204 versus the Naperville School District 203 that is overfunded at this point. So he has sent that message and has had a strong message all day, all campaign about that business acumen. Also running on a platform of public safety, talking about a different kind of crime that he has been able to see here in Naperville, talking about police officers being faced with people being pulled over for a traffic stop and more fleeing reports for the person pulled over than in the last 5 years. So he's been concerned about that. But again, a lot of people here at the Empire Bar and Grill very happy to see the numbers that have come out so far. We will see when we'll hear from him. I just saw some members of his family walk by, so I will let you know as soon as we get word that he may take the stage.
Hey, get in there with 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah, great hustle, Mark.
That's a lifetime for you, Mark. You cover a lot of breaking news. We put you.
I brought these from the other location too. Okay, I brought these.
Smart man.
Have headphones, will travel, because that's how you roll, Mark Rivera.
Hey,
yeah, great update for us.
And
really
we'll hear
good.
from the future mayor of Chicago, Naperville, in just a little bit. Another race we've been watching not far from Naperville is the city of Joliet. We want to take a look at those numbers because even though 52% of the vote is in, this appears to be over. We ran a soundbite earlier with Terry D'Arcy, and now we're told that the incumbent Bob Odenkirk did call D'Arcy to concede. So this looks to be done as well. A new mayor of Joliet out there in Kendall and Will counties.
Yeah, new mayor in Naperville, new mayor in Joliet tonight. So
things changing out there in southwest suburbs. Yeah.
Well, we're trying to find. There will be a new mayor sometime this week here, the 57th mayor of the city of Chicago, perhaps. And right now we're looking at the numbers for the city of Chicago, the citywide runoff, with 95% of the votes being cast. Brennan Johnson with 51% of the vote compared to Paul Vallis with 49%. Of course, we still have those mail-in ballots still out. Let's go live to Sarah Schulte. She is at the Johnson campaign headquarters in the South Loop. Sarah, what's happening?
Well, I'll tell you, even though the Vallis campaign says it's too close to call, you couldn't tell that here. People are very excited and really confident that Brandon Johnson will hold that lead and pull this out tonight. Joining me right now is former mayoral candidate and state representative from the 26th District, Cam Buckner. What do you think about it?
Listen, this is a fantastic night. There's a lot of energy in this room. We knew it was going to be a close race. We knew it would come down to the last votes. But what we're seeing today is that the people of Chicago made a choice about the future, and it looks like that choice may be Brandon Johnson.
You ran in this for mayor. You had to make a choice on who you were going to endorse. You didn't have to, but you did. Why did you choose to endorse Brandon Johnson over Paul Vallis?
For me, it was more aligned with what I had been talking about as a mayoral candidate and as a state rep. To me, it wasn't about bringing Chicago back to some nostalgic version of herself, but giving Chicago the chance to be the city that she's always deserved to be. And I really felt like Brandon looked a lot like what that picture for Chicago was. And so happy to be on board.
You know, Paul Vallis, he apparently is going to come down and talk at his campaign election party, basically telling his supporters it's going to be too close to call. Do you think ultimately, even once they count every single vote, that Brandon Johnson will pull this out?
Listen, I think every vote has to be counted. And listen, Sarah, we've waited this long. We can wait a little bit longer. I told someone earlier today that the great Chicago writer Nelson Algren said that Chicago is a ninth inning kind of town. The game's not over until the last man is out. So we'll see what happens.
All right, thanks so much, Cam. Appreciate it. Again, that is former mayoral candidate Cam Buckner, state representative from the 26th District. Here, everybody quite excited that that lead that Brandon Johnson has right now, that will hold, and they are confident that he will be the next mayor of the city of Chicago. Live in the South Loop, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you guys.
All right, Sarah, thanks so much. Cam Buckner, Chuy Garcia, the only two former candidates that were against Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis, endorsing Brandon Johnson, the other four candidates endorsing Paul Vallis. But tonight, there's caution in announcing a winner?
From both sides, really, because we still have a substantial amount of votes. We want to look at the numbers. As I tell you, the Chicago Board of Elections had said about 91,000 votes still out there. Not necessarily all going to be mailed back and postmarked in time, but there's still a good amount of votes that yet to be counted after tonight. There you go, 97% in, and Brandon Johnson holding a 2 percentage point lead there, 277,388 to 264,395.
It's at about 13,000. That lead has increased. Now, it was about 7,000 when we checked in. It was 95% or so. So
David, you were doing a little bit of the math for us. Thank you, because I've already conceded that I am far from a math expert here. I'm glad I have you and Cheryl and you, Laura. But the numbers are going to matter in terms of a recount.
Exactly.
Yeah, in terms of a recount, if he's at 95% of what Brandon Johnson would get, assuming these numbers hold and Brandon Johnson would be the apparent winner, Paul Vallis would have an automatic right to a recount. Below that, it would not be the case. And so it's important to watch this trend. And also, as the gap widens and we keep looking toward these mail-in ballots, it becomes harder and harder to make up that difference as that gap widens. And so it looked when it was only a couple thousand votes, then 90-some thousand that are out, you can cover that. As it gets to, what are we at, more than 10,000, it becomes a lot harder. You have to win big on the mail-ins.
But we don't know at this hour where those mail-in votes are coming from, and that could make a huge difference on who could win this election.
That's why you don't see either campaigns saying that they're going to declare victory tonight. Now, in the old days, before early voting, if you had a 2-point lead, something like this, you could probably at the end of the night say, we can all go home. But we have early voting now. We have, voting. We have mail-in voting. That's really good for democracy because people can, it widens the participation, but it changes the whole dynamic of an election night. You can no longer just assume that you've won based on the numbers that came in that day. That's why we're not going to be able to decide this tonight.
And it seems like both the candidates understand this. If you remember when we had 9 candidates, and I think Lori had already conceded, and Chuy Garcia was behind her, and his campaign was saying, "Oh no, hang on, we're not going to." That quickly changed as those numbers came in, but it seems like these candidates, leaders, they understand exactly what you're saying. Let's talk about Brandon Johnson as a mayor if this happens. And this guy is a county commissioner who had the support of Tony Preckwinkle, right? But doesn't have a lot of political experience. And so as the shape of city council takes place, and if Mr. Johnson becomes mayor, he's going to have to surround himself with a lot of people, perhaps with more political experience or not. I guess both sides could say maybe he doesn't need that, or maybe he does need people who have run large organizations.
Political experience, but also even more important, administrative management experience, which he has virtually none of. So he's hopefully going to be thinking, and I've interviewed him and I've seen him on the campaign tour. He says he's talking to people who he might have in mind to be the next police superintendent. He and his people are already doing their research. So that's going to be an important thing for him to be able to show. In terms of the city council, we've already been moving since the last election toward a much more independent city council. You saw last week how the members of city council created new committees. They want to have more power. With a Brandon Johnson, who's someone who is really more about it being about progressive government, and when you're bringing in more progressives into the council, more Democratic Socialists, it looks like, are going to be elected tonight, you're bound to have a much more independent city council, but then a lot more unpredictability coming out of City Hall.
All right. Well, I will quote the phenomenal Laura Washington tonight when she always says, a strong council means a weak mayor. Okay.
That's the way it's supposed to go. Right. It hasn't gone that way up till now.
And now with this 14 new aldermen that will be in the city council, who knows? We can talk about it next time we gather about the analysis on this. But for now, we're going to go to Judy Sue, who has one of her special guests for us tonight. Judy.
Yeah, you guys, we're going to talk about the younger votes right now. Joining me is Katrina Fidd with Chicago Votes, which works to encourage younger voters to get involved so they can change politics as usual. Katrina was also here in February when we were talking about the younger voter turnout, which wasn't that great. What is the difference this time around?
Yeah, this time I'm back with some good news. Voters aged 18 to 24 saw an increase of 32% in votes since the February election just 6 weeks ago. And then when you look at voters aged 25 to 34, you see a 24% increase. So when you combine those two age groups, which we classify as like the young voters, they're making up about 20% of the electorate. And that's a substantial amount of power that they carry, that we carry this election cycle.
Oh, I remember you and I were talking in February, and you said, I'm going to get out there and we're going to keep working during this runoff campaign. What has Chicago Vote's been doing the last few weeks to drive out that younger vote?
Yeah, so between the February election and now, we have not stopped. We put out another voter guide solely focusing on Brandon Johnson and Paul Valles, and another questionnaire was sent to the candidates. They completed it. That has been distributed in Cook County Jail, mailed to young voters throughout the city, distributed by community partners as well. In addition to that, we've hosted parades to the polls with high schools again. We had a huge party at the polls last week with about 400 high school students from, I believe, 13 high schools around the city that came to vote and motivate their peers to vote as well. And I think there's just been a lot of mobilization. I mean, this is not a small accomplishment. We have organizations like Good Kids Mad City hosting events, constantly updating young people on Twitter, Healthy Hood hosting mayoral forums. So there's been a robust Get Out the Vote campaign by nonprofits and grassroots organizations in addition to the campaigns.
Now, for those who are not familiar with Chicago Votes, what is the general age that you target and reach? And what is your message to them about how important this is to get involved?
Yeah, we primarily serve people 16 to 35. And the overall goal is just to break down barriers young people face to civics, and voting is one of those things. So getting the youth voice out there is so important, because we know elected officials are held accountable by their constituents, and if they don't think young people are going to be voting, they don't take them as seriously as constituents. So that's why it's super important that we get out there and we show them that we are a force, we are powerful, and we can decide these elections.
Well, the numbers are showing this time around. Katrina, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on that, all the work that you all put in. Rob and Cheryl, back to you guys.
Yeah, certainly a lot of work. We're keeping an eye on the weather. You can see that at the bottom corner of your screen. Our meteorologist Cheryl Scott is tracking another thunderstorm warning. Huh, Cheryl?
Yes, we have this one isolated storm. It's still holding strong, so a new severe warning has just been issued here for parts of the area. It's this storm right here. So for those of you in DeKalb, Kane, and Kendall County, you are now under the severe thunderstorm warning until 10 p.m. And the main threats here will be high gusty winds and some small hail being reported, but we can't rule out hail up to 1/4 inch in size. And Oswego and places that got hit earlier today, you saw some very large hail. We're not done with that severe weather threat just yet. On top of that, we are looking at very heavy rain out of the Salmonock area, stretching over towards Plano. So that's the center of the storm right now. It's going to continue to track its way up to the north and east. These storms are moving at about 40 to 45 miles per hour. So as we track this out ahead of it, heads up, this will be heading in your direction soon. Yorkville about 924, Sugar Grove 927, Aurora 934, Batavia 938, Warrenville at 945. So again, with what we're seeing with these showers and storms as we put this into motion, we don't have a whole lot of activity out there right now. We've been monitoring this one cell here that's continuing to work its way in from the south and west. So something that we're going to continue to watch here. It's just been cycling through and holding on to some of its strength. So again, some downpours as well as some small hail and some gusty winds upwards of 40, 50 miles per hour. The good news is that we're seeing a weakening trend across the area. It's certainly not as strong as it was back in LaSalle County. Now, as we go into the rest of the evening, we still do have a decent amount of instability in place. So we are going to allow for an isolated storm threat, but we are also monitoring the threat of some more severe storms overnight and into the day tomorrow. So I just want to give you a big picture here, look across the area, because we do have that severe weather threat remaining in place across the region. Here's that warm front that's lifting overhead, allowing for the instability. Tornado watch box just off to the west of us, but this area of low pressure is going to move in with the cold front, and that's going to allow for more showers and storms developing overnight. So we do have isolated activity right now, even some showers and storms just up to the north and west that will continue to cross the state line. And as we go into the day tomorrow, still the severe weather threat. So showers and storms isolated in nature until about midnight. We'll catch a lull during the early morning hours, and then between about 4 and 5 a.m., more rain and storms here start to bubble up and develop. Some of these storms tomorrow morning during the morning commute pose a strong to severe threat, and all severe weather modes will be at risk tomorrow. So we're talking about the threat of isolated tornadoes as well as high gusty winds, damaging winds, and hail not out of the question. So we want everyone to be weather aware. Of course, if another warning pops up, we will definitely let you know about that. But just to rewind, we do have that severe thunderstorm warning in effect for LaSalle County until 10 p.m. with this isolated storm that is impacting that area right now. More to come as we go into that 10 o'clock hour, and we'll have a full update here, but definitely some heavy rain right on the boundary there of Kane and Kendall County. So Sugar Grove, Yorkville, this is heading close to you. Back to you guys.
All right, about 40 more minutes for that warning before it expires.
Glad she's with us tonight to give us those live updates. 36th Ward. We want to show you the data because we understand there has been a concession. If we can take a look at this. Gilbert Villegas, the incumbent, ran away with this. 59% of the vote. Lori Torres-Witt with 41%. 93% of the vote in, and we're told that Lori Torres-Witt did call to concede to Gilbert Villegas, who will remain the alderman of the 36th Ward.
All right, when the numbers are coming in, and they're nothing official tonight, but when there are concession speeches and concession phone calls, it's likely that that is going to be the case. So
usually they know the numbers, they crunch the
right.
numbers. We want to bring our analysts in. Speaking of crunching the numbers, David, I know you've been looking at a little bit of the data, trying to figure out where the mail-ins that are still uncounted. The Board of Elections said 91,000 out there. They have to be postmarked by today to be counted, so we don't know how close to 91,000 will actually be a part of that final count, but those numbers matter.
Those numbers matter a lot. We don't know where those ballots were from, and that's really important too, because depending on the ward, these numbers can vary quite a lot. But let's say, as happens typically, of those 91,000 or so, let's say a little more than half of those come in. Right now, Vallis is behind by about 13,000 votes. If that's, say, 45,000 votes come in and are counted, he's got to make up 13,000 votes among 45,000 votes. It means he's probably got to outdo Vallis by about 2/3 of the votes would have to go his way, possibly. So it becomes real harder and harder for him to overcome that if the numbers stay pretty much where they are.
You're talking about Paul Vallis right there.
That's what Vallis would have to outperform.
Right, Brandon Johnson.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times the campaigns, and I think that's what happened with Chuy. We were talking about Chuy Garcia earlier and how he didn't want to concede. They wanted, out of respect to those voters whose votes have not been counted yet, they want to maybe wait a day or so. But if the trend goes in the direction that David says it's going in, they're not going to be able to wait very long. The Vallis campaign is going to probably have to fess up tomorrow, perhaps.
And one thing is very important to remember, those are requested votes.
Absolutely.
Those are requested ballots. That doesn't necessarily mean that 91,000 will be sent back in, and they have to be postmarked by today.
Correct.
So it really is going to take some time, because they could get here till Thursday, because the mail takes a little longer sometimes, and you have to wait till each one of those requested ballots are counted. So it could be based on your numbers too. So we could. I know the Vallis camp was saying 14 days, but usually
not going to take that long.
It shouldn't take that long.
And let's not forget, a lot of that depends on where those ballots come from and how many of those ballots come in. And there's a demographic issue too. Typically, an older voter tends to be more active, and that the older voters are perhaps skewing a little bit more toward Vallis. Right. So it's not probably quite as stark as what I just laid out, but nevertheless,
he has some big ground to make.
Yeah, he does. Right. Yeah.
That was the point you were trying to make.
Yeah. Speaking of Paul Vallis, Craig Wall is at campaign headquarters there. We want to check in with him to see what's going on there. Hi, Craig.
Hey guys, I'm joined by 2nd Ward Alderman Brian Hopkins, who's a supporter of Paul Vallis's. And Brian, we were just chatting. You've been upstairs What's the mood with Paul Vallis and the others up there? They've got to be frustrated.
Well, it is somewhat frustrating. You know, it's like playing the Super Bowl, and when the game's over, they turn off the scoreboard and they say, we're not going to tell you who won. Come back tomorrow, right? This is literally too close to call. This is not the result we wanted tonight, but it's a result we were prepared for. We knew this was a tight race, and we knew it was going to come down to a 50-50, almost a coin toss scenario, and that's where we are right now. Commissioner Johnson does have a very narrow lead, but there's still 50,000 uncounted mail-in ballots that are still out there and that will be coming in and will be tabulated in the next couple of days. Those 50,000 ballots could possibly turn this around and determine the outcome.
Have you guys sort of done some tracking on those mail-in ballots? Because there are some analysts who suggest they might go much more for Brandon Johnson because he did so well the last time.
Well, that's certainly possible. He did win the battle of the mail-in votes on February 28th. We acknowledge that. But this is a different cycle. It's a different election. So it's possible that Paul Vallis could be the one to win the mail-in votes this time. We won't know until we count them, and the Board of Elections is going to be focused on that for the next 24 hours, if not longer.
How long do you think it might take until we actually know definitively when this race can be called?
Well, it won't be tonight, but I think it will be relatively soon. 50,000 votes, it's a lot when you look at the margin right now, but for the Board of Elections staff to collect and tabulate, it shouldn't take that long. Certainly not as long as it did in some of the aldermanic races in the first ward. For example, how long that took. We don't expect a similar scenario here, and there's really nothing else for the board to focus on except determining the outcome of the mayor's race. So we know they'll put all their resources into tabulating those mail-in ballots, making sure every one of those votes is counted so nobody gets disenfranchised. That's really all we can hope for tonight.
Brian Hopkins, Second Ward Alderman, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your insight. Guys, we'll toss it back to you in the studio.
All right, Craig, thanks so much for that update tonight. ABC 7's Sarah Schulte is joining us live tonight from the Brandon Johnson campaign headquarters in the South Loop at the Marriott Marquis. Sarah.
Well, Cheryl, obviously one very, very energized crowd, even though Paul Vallis' campaign says it's too close to call. As far as the people here are concerned, they feel like Brandon Johnson has already won. Joining me right now is newly elected Congressman Jonathan Jackson for the Chicago's 1st District. What do you think of this?
I think it's incredibly exciting. I think it was a hard-fought race. Both men are honorable. It was a great race, and the people have spoken. So we just have to wait for the final votes to come in. I think Brandon's base has been broad and deep. If people could be here in attendance today, they would see the energy, they would see the youth, they would see the vitality of the city is right here. Young people are now coming of age. They're voting their interest. They want to see a safer, more affordable Chicago so that the residents can stay. We have an incredibly shrinking city with a falling GDP. We've got to turn the economics around in the city, raise our GDP, and make sure our citizens stop leaving. Be the magnet that we've always been.
You mentioned young people. Brandon Johnson said today he really feels like that he, energized the youth vote. What do you think did it for him? Was it the younger generation?
Yeah, I think it was also in part. I think it was clearly two options. I think some of the younger people are looking at the root causes that were attracted to the message. We have seen our schools depleted, defunded. We've seen them chartered. We've seen them decimated. It was just 10 years ago that we had 50 elementary schools to close, the largest elementary school closure in American history. We've had a long period of non-credentialed people being at the head of our education system, and now we're paying the price. So now we have to turn our school district around. We have to make sure that it's safe so that the citizens will stay, and then we have to improve the economics. We're losing conventions. We have to have a meeting with the business community. Chicago has enough for everyone. It's just been misappropriated.
Thank you so much for joining us again. That was Congressman Jonathan Jackson, hoping for a Brandon Johnson victory tonight. Live in the South Loop, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News, back to you.
Congressman Jackson brought something we all nodded our heads kind of as we were talking about the two candidates. I mean, it was heated at times, Cheryl, but they were here to debate in our studio a couple weeks ago. Twice, and going all the way back. These candidates stuck to their messaging, and it never got nasty. And I don't know if that's a terrible way to describe it, but we'll bring our, take a look at the numbers and we'll bring our analyst back in here for a few minutes. 99% in. Brandon Johnson now 284, 108 to 268. 115. I mean, they would go at each other a little bit. I think
it's about 18,000 now. That lead has stretched about 18,000.
Their supporters would go at it a lot, but Laura, they stayed to their messaging, and whoever concedes, you think it would be gracious and humbling. And that's refreshing in this political climate.
Especially in Chicago, isn't it?
Right.
Remember the last go-round with Tony Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot? That was very nasty, very unpleasant. At the end, they had their little unity handshake, but then they hardly ever spoke again. I'm hoping that's not going to be the case. Paul Vallas has said out on the campaign trail that they're friends, and I hope that's true, and I hope that they will be. Both of them bring a lot to the table in terms of the advice, connections, relationships that they can share with the other.
Yeah, they're supporters, though, on the other hand.
You look at Congressman Jonathan Jackson, he talked about the business community, and I'm thinking about Congressman Bobby Rush. He supported Vallas, and he did not support Jonathan Jackson in his bid to become congressman. So there's some of that thought about, he talked about the youth voting, and then he talked about the business community, and whoever wins for mayor, that will be a top priority because so many businesses have suffered in the pandemic and did not come back. They've got crime they have to deal with. They have to talk about education. They have to talk about the pension pension funds as well. So we're going to talk about all of these issues that the next mayor, the 57th mayor of the city of Chicago will have to face. We're going to take a break, though, for now, because we're going to take a pause so our on-air viewers can join us. But we'll be right back, everybody.
From ABC 7 Eyewitness News, this is a Vote 2023 election update.
Good evening, everybody. Brandon Johnson now ahead in what remains a tight Chicago mayoral runoff election.
With 99% of precincts reporting, Johnson with a nearly 16,000 vote lead over Paul Vallas. Sarah Schulte live at Johnson's headquarters on the near south side with more. Sarah?
Well, Rob, obviously a very energized crowd here at the Johnson campaign party. Many people pretty confident here that these numbers will stick and that Brandon Johnson will be the next mayor of the city of Chicago. The plan is for Johnson to come down after Paul Vallas speaks. Live at the Johnson headquarters, Sarah Schulte, ABC 7 Eyewitness News, back to you.
All right, Sarah, let's go live now to political reporter Craig Wall, who is at Vallas headquarters. Craig.
Yeah, we understand Paul Vallas is expected to come down and speak to supporters shortly. The air in this ballroom right now, not as excited as it is on the other side. We expect that Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallas will have a conversation on the phone before Paul Vallas comes down, waiting to hear from him shortly. Back to you guys.
All right, Craig, thanks so much for that. Now let's take a quick check of the race for mayor out in Naperville. Scott Worley holding a 2,000 vote lead over Benny White with 100% of the precincts now reporting.
Our live election coverage continues on our website or wherever you stream. Then you can join us right here for special election coverage on Eyewitness News at 10. But hop on over and watch us stream as we continue our coverage there.
We will join you again, everybody, at abc7chicago.com or wherever you stream. We'll take a break. We'll see you in a minute. All right, welcome back, everybody.
I'm telling you, things happen fast.
This is our special election night coverage here on abc7chicago.com. Our analysts, who we call family, are here tonight, and we wanted to report that the Associated Press is now reporting that Brandon Johnson will be the next mayor, the 57th mayor of the city of Chicago.
That's what we were all doing, looking at our phones and seeing what the Associated Press is reporting. Here are the numbers. Let's get you the specific data. 99% in. Brandon Johnson with a 2 percentage point lead over Paul Vallis. Johnson, 284,108 votes to Paul Vallis's 268,115. The Associated Press calling this. We're going to reserve calling it here as we continue to wait for some other information.
That's about 18,000 votes that separate them too. Of course, we've been talking about the mail-in vote. We still have to have the results from those being counted. But before we took a break, we were talking about support and Brandon Johnson and how this race has turned around in such a different direction.
Well, absolutely, in very quickly it seems, but Brian Hopkins was on our air just a few minutes ago and was saying there were about 50,000 votes that are expected to come in. If he's 18,000 behind, he basically needs to double the number that Brandon Johnson would get on that remaining 50,000 or so votes that are still to be counted, and that becomes pretty insurmountable when the live vote has been, really within a point or two percentage-wise. And so I can see why the AP has made this decision, as you said. We're not calling it, but the numbers really look.
And Hopkins pointed to, it said it's a different time now. It's a different, and anything can happen in Chicago politics, but the numbers are starting to favor Brandon Johnson. But neither campaign is ready to concede. We're expected to hear from Paul Vallis here in the next half hour or so. It will be curious if he holds off on that or what he would say as we get to the finish line here. And we've got at least one major media outlet calling this thing.
Well, it seems like most of his surrogates are saying he is not going to concede tonight. They want to wait for more votes to come in, and that's the right of a candidate to do that. But when the Associated Press calls something, they've done their homework. They've got the numbers. They've done the analysis. So it's looking more and more likely that it's going to be a Brandon Johnson win, and that's interesting because I think it continues a trend that the city is moving to the left. You can see that in the last round of citywide elections, and it's particularly around Lori Lightfoot running as a reformer. Some people think that she maybe moved away from being a progressive reformer, but she was elected. There was a much more progressive city council that was elected last time around. Socialists were elected. So it seems like we're moving further to the left as a city, if you want to look at the results of this election.
So let's talk about, before we took a break, we were talking about what the mayor will actually be facing. Whoever is the mayor of the city, the 57th mayor of the city of Chicago, will have an up-road climb for them.
For so many reasons.
Right,
yeah.
Let's start with the 14 new aldermen, alderwomen, alderpersons that have been elected. Public safety, crime, education, businesses returning back to Chicago because so many were hurt in the pandemic. There is a lot on the plate for this next mayor of Chicago. How can it happen with this new elected city council as well? As you always say, Laura, a strong city council, a weak mayor, no matter who gets elected.
Well, I think this city council is really chomping at the bit to be stronger than ever. And you've got to have so many new faces. It's going to be a much younger group of aldermen. Many of the old timers, the people who have a lot of senior experience, are leaving, retiring. And that means that a lot of their knowledge and expertise is going with them. You're going to have a much more leftward city council. There are going to be more people of color. It looks like you're going to have two new Asian Americans that are going to be elected to the council. So that's going to mean there's going to be a lot more diverse voices, and the mayor's going to have to deal with that. And it was because there was so much of a divide in terms of where the council members brought their support. Johnson got a lot of aldermen to be, but so did Vallis. there's going to have to be some peacemaking that's going to have to
But
get
David,
done.
this council would likely align more toward Brandon Johnson, and so this will play in his favor if he is indeed successful as the next mayor.
Yes, but one thing that won't necessarily align is the economics. And what he's looking at is he's looking at federal COVID money going away. The new mayor will also be looking at significant pension underfunding that has not been resolved. Mayor Lightfoot, with federal money, was able to put another nearly $250 million extra toward pensions in this budget. That probably won't happen. Johnson, if he's mayor, also has the problem that he promised not to raise property taxes. It's going to be challenging. And there are a whole number of other issues. The policing thing is, of course, not solved anywhere near to that. And then, of course, the school system and what to do about the fact that he is intended to keep all the schools that are currently open. The moratorium on closing schools is going to pass soon, and there's going to be all kinds of economic pressure within that Chicago public school system because he wants to keep all those schools open and yet still fully fund them so that there's enriched programming everywhere. He's made some promises on the stump that are going to be difficult to keep, and Lori Lightfoot did the same thing when she ran for mayor, and she alienated people when she wasn't able to keep her promises.
Wow. All right. Very good analysis. Right now we're going to go to Ravi. He's been following closely these results. Ravi, what's the latest with you?
All right. There's a lot to be tracking in terms of the aldermanic races here tonight, but I just want to start very quickly with the mayor's race.
Having some trouble with Ravi's mic. We'll see if we can get that fixed and come back to him. It's not uncommon, Dave, for candidates to make these promises on the stump, but you make it's hard to do. I mean, you say these things, and then everybody's like, okay, and then you try and execute these things.
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah, it's not that easy.
No, it's not that easy, and whomever would be elected tonight, it would be facing similar problems. I don't know how many times Paul Vallis and his promises had said he was going to spend TIF money on this, tax increment financing district money on this, that, and everywhere. It's a really, really challenging
We got to
job.
step in here. We're going to take a quick pause because we're going to join our on-air audience. We'll be right back.
Loss of Chuy Garcia's loss of his daughter. We know all too well what the loss of a child can mean to a family. So
Paul Vallis speaking right now to his constituents in the race for the mayor of
seconds.
Chicago. Let's listen in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored and humbled by all of your support. I ran for mayor to bring the city together, and it's clear, based on the results tonight, that the city is deeply divided. So tonight, even though, of course, we believe every vote should be counted, I called Brandon Johnson and told him that I absolutely expect him to be the next mayor of Chicago. And please, it's critically important. I mean, this campaign that I ran to bring the city together would not be a campaign that fulfilled my ambitions if this election is going to divide us more. So it's critically important that we use this opportunity to come together, and I've offered him my full support on his transition, and God knows we spent a lot of time in forums together, and certainly we shared a lot of opinions, and I look forward to working with him and providing him with the full support he needs to be successful. Before I begin, I want to take this moment to thank my family for their unwavering support and sacrifice. You know, of course, my wife Sharon, whose birthday is today, and as I mentioned, you know, with me spending so much time away, she hasn't told me what her birthday gift, what she wants her birthday gift to be. Maybe she got it. You never know. I know. No, don't blame Sharon. She's going to say, "Oh, great." Everybody's going to say, "Hey, what did you wish for?" No, I also want to recognize my veteran and first responder sons, Paulie and Gus, and my and my daughter-in-law, Leslie, who is a special education lawyer and advocate. I want to thank them very much, too. I'm also joined on the stage today by Danny Golden, a hero police officer. God bless you, Danny. And I know Carlos Yanes is here today, looking strong and walking strong. Let's give him a round of applause, too. I want to thank each and every one of you who have cast their vote in support of me. Our journey over the last 10 months would not have been possible without you. Day in and day out, I've been energized by your enthusiasm to help us reach our ultimate goal of bringing our city back together and getting our city on track. We ran an issue-oriented campaign, which is the only campaign I know how to run. Issues important to everyday Chicagoans across our city. I put out a public safety first plan in this campaign because public safety is a fundamental right. Without it, we will continue to be defined more by our differences than by what we yearn for in common. The only pathway forward in our great city is together. Whether it's quality schools, affordable or equitable economic development, the solutions we adopt and implement must work for all Chicagoans. I am proud that we have built a diverse coalition over the past 10 months, a coalition that has spanned across this great city and encapsulates the various cultures, languages, and ideologies that make Chicago so unique and so great. It's time for all Chicagoans to put aside their differences and to walk and to work together, supporting the daunting work ahead for our next mayor. I am optimistic that better, brighter days are on the horizon. Now, before I conclude my remarks, I could not leave this stage without paying tribute to all of you who have supported me, and by recognizing some individuals specifically. And forgive me if I don't recognize all of them, but in recognizing them, it's a recognition of all that you have done, both individually and collectively. First, my great thanks to Senator Dick Durbin, Secretary of State Jesse White, Congressman Bobby Rush, Governor Pat Quinn, and former Senate President Emil Jones. Friends and heroes of mine who I've known for 4 decades, your support gave my career validation and provided enormous comfort and confidence in this race. I want to thank my opponents in the primary race who saw fit to support me, Alderman Rod Sawyer and Sophia King, Jamal Green, and special thanks to my dear and close friend, Dr. Willie Wilson, who gave my family so much comfort and support when we lost our youngest son. I want to thank other elected officials and office holders who also joined my campaign, faith-based leaders who graced me with their prayers, the 24 unions who endorsed me and supported me, and the many others who had the faith in this campaign and my promise to make Chicago the city that works for everyone. I would also be remiss if I did not thank my exceptional campaign team led by Brian Town, who our wives have permitted us to participate in couples therapy after this race, because we're going to need it, and so many other dedicated and skilled professionals. We have been blessed with hundreds of dedicated volunteers who have been instrumental in helping us reach this point. I just want to say this journey has been great, and it is an experience that I would not exchange for any of the experiences I've had in my long career. I want to thank you all for supporting me, and God bless you and your families.
Paul Vallis thanking his supporters tonight, joined by his wife Sharon. It's her birthday today.
It's been a night.
His 2 sons on the stage, as well as his daughter-in-law. thanking everyone, including the faith leaders who helped him get to this point today.
Called Brandon Johnson to wish him good luck. We're 10 minutes away from our 10 p.m. newscast, so don't go anywhere. Full coverage is coming up. Feels like a nice breeze.
Uh-huh. Okay, yep.
So you think we're going to go with the speech as a top?
Hold on, she's talking to us.
Okay.
Okay. He's got to wait till 10.
And we are calling him the next mayor-elect or mayor
Have we called it yet?
and all of that. We put a check mark by the,
Lightfoot's already sent out a statement congratulating Johnson.
but we're not calling him the next mayor. Sure. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I still want to see that. I want to see the mail-ins, and I want to see where